Hope everybody is doing well. It's time for the radio show with Mark Lee. And of course, we've got another exciting guest. And I hope that everybody is doing well with this weather. It was definitely a warm weekend, and that is a wonderful thing. The fact that we had this kind of warm temperatures, even though it has cooled down a little bit, I think it might have dropped about 10 or 15 degrees, but it's definitely still not freezing. And since it's in the middle of March, that is a good thing. So definitely glad that it's not freezing and not winter like temperatures, even though I'm going to find out how it's treating Donald where he's at, as he is a filmmaker. And I do know that I've been excited about the sports world. I did see that my alma mater, the Marquette Golden Eagles, they were the Warriors when I was in school, are going to be the number two team in their particular region. That can be a great thing. But as we all know, if you follow tournaments, and I will probably be doing a pool at some point or another, or at least participating in one, whether that's in Yahoo or whether that's a company pool or whatever happens in that space. I usually do at least one or two, sometimes two or three, and we'll see whether I have any luck since I have never won one of these, but they're always fun to do at all along those lines. But it definitely be interesting, and I do know those 2-15 matches, which is one that we will be facing, can be detrimental because sometimes those 15 teams can surprise you and all along those lines, just like those 6-11 games and those 5-12 games are definitely some that are up for grabs and all in that space. And of course, there's always folks that are trying to figure out which number one seed will go down first. And definitely, though I'm here in the Carolina area, it'll be interesting to see because the UNC actually comes in losing their conference championship. So they might be hungry, or they might be a team that is ready to try to eliminate them from this tournament as well. But we're going to see how that all plays out. And definitely, if anybody had told me, and I put this on one of my Facebook posts, that they had the knowledge that North Carolina State was going to win 5 games in 5 days and get that automatic bid for the ACC, I needed to find that person to give me the lottery numbers because they have some amazing predictive abilities. I don't think anybody saw that coming whatsoever. Maybe Donald saw it. Maybe he said that in his projections and everything, but I sure did not see that coming. But speaking of Donald, I met him at the Hayti Heritage Film Festival, and that is always a fun event. I was actually involved in some of the initial planning of that festival, and next year will be our 30th anniversary. Yeah, I've been at Hayti that long and all along those lines, but Tyra Dixon did a great job curating it this year around, and definitely Lana Garland and others have done a great job in putting together that festival on a regular basis. And definitely we've had a number of great curators over the years. And like I said, I've done some curation there as well. So I was quite pleased when I saw the film that Donald had done and what it was all about, because I am a supporter of the notion of family and the importance of family. As a matter of fact, I just talked to Mom on yesterday, and either yesterday or Saturday. I know it's definitely we talk on a regular basis, and she is definitely not just the matriarch of our family, but it's oftentimes the matriarch of the community, along with my Aunt Julie, and all along those lines, because both of them are in their. I know Mom is definitely in her early 80s, and I want to say that Aunt Julie is in that space as well. But definitely, they are doing great jobs of keeping up with their family members, whether that's keeping up with their grandkids, because both of them have grandkids, or whether that's keeping up with other members of the community, whether that's second cousins, first cousins, or a number of others in that space. And I know that that's what Donald's film was all about, was that importance of taking care of our elderly, and particularly those elderly ladies that are part of our lives as well. And like I said, Hayti was busy this weekend because I was over there, and we had the Candlelight Music Series. I believe that was on a Thursday. I was actually not working that, but if you're familiar with Candlelight, they are all over the nation. You get those kind of fake candles, and then there is usually a chamber orchestra or some other kind of orchestra that is providing either movie type movies, because I know one year they did, or one time they did like theme music from horror movies, and then they've done other kinds of themes as well. And then, of course, they've done the music of popular artists like Beyonce, and I think the one this Thursday was the music of Adele. So that's what they have been doing, and that is a rental project. And then on Saturday, we had our regular poetry slam. So that takes place on a monthly basis. As a matter of fact, I think this was the last chance slam, which meant that the winner of this particular slam, and I believe that was Tamisha, if I remember her name correctly, she will now be part of the slam team, and they will be going to, I believe it's Pompano Beach, Florida, to compete in the Nationals. I believe that's where the Nationals are. I don't think that's the regionals. I think that's the Nationals that are down there and all along those lines. And then we also had the Summer Youth Arts Intensive that was there, and they were there actually there doing the film festival because the older kids, if I remember correctly, got to learn something about making a film. So Roman Gabriel, who's a friend of mine and a filmmaker, was actually teaching them about filmmaking, and he said they made some pretty good films. Something about Rice Krispies or that particular cereal and a villain. I'm just trying to figure out how you get Rice Krispies in a horror movie or a villain, but somehow they managed to do that. So I've got to get with Roman and see if I can get a copy of that to see how that was done and the theme that those kids came up with and all in that space. And then we had folks that were doing different lectures and things of that space. So there were definitely some talkback sessions that were very amazing. And some of those you can even find right here on Pod TV because we do have some of those re-airing on the Pod TV network. But I just want to come back and talk to Donald and see what he's got going on and whether he was one of those people that would be smart enough to bet that North Carolina State would pull off 5 wins in 5 days and manage to pull off that upset in the world of sports, and whether he's like me and will be doing one of those pulls and hoping that he wins something because I do them every year and I've yet to win. I think one year I was in the running slightly, and then it's kind of like the conference tournaments. The upset started happening and I got eliminated very quickly and everything. So, Donald, are you going to be doing anything in the sports world, or do you just try to stick on only to filmmaking and stay away from that whole lane?
No, I used to, and I was I was voting with my heart way too much, and I just kept losing. Uh, but it's always fun though. I didn't do it this year. I kind of blanked out on sports a little bit, just sort of being busy on the film end of things. But I like you was very surprised about North Carolina. In fact, UNC has always been one of my favorite collegiate men's basketball teams. And so I wasn't seeing I didn't see that coming. Uh, but I will say that it's been a great weekend for me being from Chicago and seeing my fighting alumni win the Big Ten tournament. So that was really exciting yesterday. It was a game that had me sweating bullets all the way to the end, and that's that's what you want out of a college basketball game. And I was excited to come out on the other side a winner. So.
No, I'm glad that you came out a winner because, like I said, I went to a Big East school. I'm an alumna of Marquette University, and we knew we were going to have a handful going up against now the number one team in the country and the number one team in the tournament and the defending champion. But I thought we played scrappy as Shaka Smart gets us to do on a regular basis. But yeah, we ran out of steam, and then it became like a somewhat of a blowout. But at least we played them good for a half and a half of a half. So it wasn't until the latter part of the game that we ran into the injury and those 3 points started falling for them. And I think we lost by like 16 or something like that. But now we get to regroup, hopefully get our star player Tyler Kolek back and hopefully make some sort of run in the tournament. But yeah, I was sitting there going like, no, this when I saw the draw, I was like, this could be problematic. So I was actually shocked that they were hanging in there as long as they did and everything. So were you always interested? Because I actually had a good friend of mine when I was at Marquette, Fitz Augustine. There was a filmmaker in that area of Chicago, and I don't know if he's still in Chicago. But did you always know that you wanted to be a filmmaker, and were you telling stories as a youngster? So were you the kid that was over there making up stories and knew that you wanted to get involved at least in some form of storytelling? Maybe not filmmaking, but some form of storytelling as a youngster.
Uh, no, actually. I'm always intrigued by like the people that know very young in age of what they want to do. Um, but it's now that wasn't my story, but in certain respects, my story was connected to that, and I just wasn't I wasn't cognizant of it. I wasn't aware when I was growing up. Um, my grandfather was a man who loved westerns, loved movies, and he had he was always in one place in the house, and we knew exactly where Granddaddy would be. Go in the house, he's on the back den in front of the television in his recliner, and every time I walk in, I go straight to the back. Hey, granddaddy, and I want time with granddaddy. I'd sit next to him and watch westerns with him. And and my father took that trait. My
Mhm.
father is a man who loves television. That's his pastime. When he's not working, he enjoys relaxing and watching television, and that's always been the thing. And so as a little boy, my father he'd be on the couch watching TV, and he'd do this thing with my sister and I'm 3 years older than my sister. So when we were kids, we tell him to form a boat with his legs, and so he'd arch his legs to make just a little bit of room on the couch. And me and my sister, we'd be behind him, and we'd be playing like we're just riding on a boat. And he's sitting there watching television, laid out on the couch. And so it was just so it's like always sort of that connection to me and the screen, but I wasn't really aware of like the joy or the happiness that it was creating and the bonds that it was creating at that time.
Yeah,
um
and along those same lines, I wanted to hear about the your granddad and his love of movies and everything. But I was just curious because my granddad also had a love not necessarily of movies, but of television. So I just want to know, was he one of those people that if it was his show or his particular movie that he was watching on TV, that if you wanted to get control of the TV, that wasn't happening? Because I know that my grandfather was a fan, as I recall, of baseball and also a fan of wrestling. And even though wrestling, most people think of it as theatrics, and I agree with them that it's theatrics, even though they have to be somewhat athletic to do those pratfalls and all along those lines, you were
yeah.
not going to be getting control of the TV if wrestling was on or the baseball game was on, because granddad Vernon was very much into his particular control of that set during that time. That was two things he was into. There might have been others as well, but that I do remember and all in that space. I just wonder how much was your granddad into that, and did he like kind of like saying, "Nope, I love y'all, but you're not touching my TV while this particular movie is on."
My grandfather's the nicest man on earth. It just it never crossed our minds. I mean, that was his place. It was his throne, his temple, what have you. And it was always westerns. And so it was just a connection. And as a kid, I never really thought to ask to break it. It's only rarely, the times that me and my sister, we'd spend the night. And at a certain point, you can't, for me as a youngster, I just can't hear that Western sound
Right.
all day long and all night long. So, there were times when I'd ask, oh, can we watch TV? Or if he'd like go I think if he go into the bathroom, and I'd switch the channel just to test it, just to see. And he'd come back and he'd sit down and he wouldn't say anything. And so I think that was when I got an opportunity. My father, he's more of the lines of what you're talking about. Yeah, it was no question. You ask him, he's like, No, 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 no. So I'm watching my show."
He's watching this series and everything. Did your grandfather ever think about the notion? Because I know that one of the things we did at HI was we recently showed the miniseries, because there was a lady that was involved in it that was from uh, Durham, North Carolina. And I think she played the wife of Bass Reeves. So did your
Mm,
dad ever think about the nature of our community, meaning the African American community, into the westerns? Because we know a lot of times that wasn't portrayed until more recently with Will Smith and his version of Wild Wild West, and definitely this whole Bass Reeves series and a couple of other stories that have come out. Because some people even said that the Lone Ranger is actually based on Bass Reeves and not necessarily what people think it is based on, and all in
mm.
that space. So I just wondered, what were his favorite westerns, and did he ever either kind of like get frustrated that there weren't enough black Western figures, or did he just like have certain ones that he loved dearly, whether that was Roy Roberts or some of the other ones that existed? So, what was his idea of our place within the Westerns?
I think I don't want to say that it was a point of frustration. I don't think it was that. I think my father was he was highly aware of like racial distinctions, racial issues, discriminations. He was a militant figure, not in the sense of like um actively militant,
Mhm.
but he did have strong beliefs. But I think in the world of the Western, just by nature of um, how it was produced and how it was distributed, there wasn't when there aren't options. It's one of those things of you either going out there and you're creating the option yourself, or you're the consumer and you're kind of tasting what's on the table in a sense.
Right.
So I think he is westerns featuring us started to come about, then those were the things like he'd navigate to that for sure. He's watched the Bass Reeves series. He loves it. Um, but yeah, back when I was a kid, it was whatever western was on television. But in terms of, I mean, he would, you know, I remember when I was really young. My aunt, my mom's sister, she moved to Stone Mountain. I think I was in second grade, and maybe when I was in third grade, second or third grade, we went to visit my aunt. Went to Stone Mountain. My aunt lived in Stone Mountain, Georgia. So we went to the mountain, and we went to the gift shop store, and I saw this shirt had Mickey Mouse and Goofy Pluto on it, and I wanted this shirt. And I told my father, I was like, "Oh, it's Mickey Mouse. I want that shirt." And he said, "I'm not getting that shirt." And I didn't understand why. I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because of the men that's on the mountain. I'm not getting that shirt." And I didn't understand it. But Stone Mountain had this the etching of Confederate soldiers on the
Right.
mountain. And that was on the shirt behind Mickey.
Mhm.
And so my mom ended up getting the shirt. My mom's like, she's a kid. He doesn't know anything about it. She got the shirt, and man, he hated that shirt, and I loved it. But I grew to understand. He made me watch the Million Man March. He was at
Mhm.
work. He told my grandmother he asked to watch the Million Man March. I had my best friend with me from across the street, and we wanted to go out and play ball so bad. And my grandmother said, "No, your father said you have to watch the Million Man March. If you move, I'm gonna get a switch, uh, you know, and I'll be waiting for you." But so yeah, those things. He was very aware and wanted us to be political in that respect.
It's
But
interesting you say that because one of the books that was actually written in '72, and it's not so much what you're talking about with Stone Mountain, and I was not aware of that image on the mountain and everything, but there is a gentleman here, um, Rod Dorfman, and I'm trying to remember his first name and everything, but he is very much involved in Marxist politics and all along those lines. And his dad, Ariel Dorfman, actually wrote the book How to Read Donald Duck, in which he is actually, and he did it in with Armand Malilart as well, but it is criticizing the Disney comics from a Marxist point of view because he
oh,
actually
wow,
saw Disney as being and Donald Duck as being kind of like a play and a method to teach people about corporate American corporate and cultural values and all along those lines. So that book was written in I think said 72, it was actually 71 and all in that space. But his son is very much involved in the nation of filmmaking and particularly Latin American filmmaking because I think that Dave, if I remember correctly, came from Argentina and all in that kind of way. But I actually saw him a few days yeah, I wouldn't say it was either a few days after y'all or a few days before y'all were there at the film festival. So we were having this conversation because they're trying to get a Latin American cultural arts center here in the area and all in that space. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on. But I think his dad is still living, as is, of course, the gentleman I'm talking about, his son, and they're still very much involved in that notion of the ways that politics plays into our literary and our film world. So, like I said, if you haven't read the book, you should definitely check it out because I think I even had a copy at one point or another. But it gives you a different perspective of the Disney legacy.
I would love to read this book. That's really fascinating. I've not even thought about it in that respect. But yeah, no, please send me the name of that book. Email me. I'd love to get that book.
Yeah, I'll definitely send that to you. And I might even put you in touch with Mr. Dorfman, and he might even put you in touch with his dad, because I want to say that both of them are still around and but still living here in the Durham area because they moved here, I think, when the dad was coming to teach at Duke or one of our other campuses and everything. I was just wondering because you mentioned your grandfather earlier, and there were certain things that was going to come down to the book as well that fascinate me in terms of our households and everything. So I
Mhm.
know when I grew up, my grandmother and granddad, particularly on my mom's side, because I didn't really know my granddad on my dad's side, as he passed away
Mhm.
when I was very young. Didn't know my grandmother, as she lived until I made it until my teen years and all in that space. But that being said, I was just wondering, that had even been early adult years now I think about it, 'cause I think it was 82 that she passed, so I would have been like around 20 or something like
Sure.
that and everything. But with granddad and grandma on my mom's side, there were certain things that you just knew you were going to see, and I didn't know if this existed in your house there in either Chicago or Georgia and everything. But
Sure.
one, we had the I call it the figurine, but it was kind of like the doghouse, but it wasn't like it was like a picture of a doghouse that's hung up by the old rotary phone. And if you acted bad, because all of us grandkids had our name on a dog, so if you acted bad, you actually went into the doghouse. And I think my mom still has that doghouse, even though some of those dogs have been worn and torn, so they may not exist, or they might have broken legs or a number of other things. And I was actually a well-behaved kid, just like I'm a well-behaved adult. My brother, different story. So he might have ended up in the doghouse a couple of times. And then I also remember that grandma had a big picture. I want to say it was in the living room, that TV room that you were talking about, and it kind of followed you around. So I didn't know if your house had a big picture of Jesus, because there was always a big picture of Jesus,
Oh,
and it kind of like followed you around the
man.
house, no matter where you were in the room, particularly if you were anywhere near the living room and everything. So you always felt like you were being watched over, because that big picture of Jesus was over the fireplace and
Oh,
everything
yes.
in that
Oh,
space.
oh, absolutely. Jesus was always watching you. Those eyes were everywhere. 100%. Both. So I grew up with both sets of my grandparents, so I was very lucky in that respect. And so like both households had these all of these religious iconographies just hanging about, whether it was the hands, whether it was Jesus, or just the Christ. um my mom my mom to make like secondary income, she used to sell art. She used to sell paintings for this small company, small business owner. Um, and these paintings came from wherever. They were like duplicates
Right.
of works. And she used to do these art shows. So she'd go around. It's based off of recommendations. People would have these parties, and you
Mhm.
come and you buy art from my mom. And sometimes she get free paintings from the company. And so there was this one painting of this one painting of a baptism, two men in the lake, in the river. It was an older man baptizing a younger. Um, and my mom used to attribute names to paintings like this. So that painting was her Uncle Hayes and her father. And then there was another painting. It was like two women. And so that was her mom and her. And all of these were wrapped up in like religious religious narratives, in a
Mhm.
sense, like religious structures and settings and things like that. But because they were connected to these personal names, it was like this real personal connection to me as I'd walk past. And just every time I'd see them, it's, oh, that's my grandfather, oh, that's Uncle Hayes, oh, that's grandma. So it made it extremely present and forward, I think,
Right.
for me. But you're absolutely correct. You just they're all around, all around.
They all around, they always watching you, always got that presence and everything. I was just wondering in that same light, and I did want to get to the notion of this movie that you had the pleasure of showing at the Hayti Heritage Center, and I definitely want to learn how you learned about that film festival. We'll get to that. But when to the making of the matriarch and all along those lines, I was just wondering how much of your own family narrative was that based on? Because as I said earlier, my grandmother, and I would argue my aunt, who is more of the keeper of the records. As a matter of fact, if I call in and want a birth date or something like that, and
Mm.
my mom doesn't know, she'll be like, "Call your Aunt Julie. You know, I don't keep track of those records and everything." So she's the one that has more of the photo albums and some of the other more detailed kind of information. So every family has a member like that, and of course, there's the notion. And I had an aunt, and I could have a brother that's facing the same ailment, but sometimes
Mm.
as they get older, they get certain ailments, and there are certain things that you have to deal with that. So I know that my aunt, for a while, was suffering from MS before she passed, multiple sclerosis, the
Mm.
MS disease, and all in that space. That's actually what took her away from this earth, and she actually lived with it for quite a bit. She lived with it for, I want to say, about 30 years or something along those lines. But mom built a lift, or had a lift put in the house, and now that my brother's got it, she's got another lift in the house as well. That it's not the same lift. I think she's getting a upfit in all in that space. But I just wondering how much of that narrative is what kind of inspired you to do this film, seeing your own family members, in your case, getting older. And in some cases, I even remember the film talked about them having to make a decision. I think it was with the, not the woman figure, but the father figure, about getting placed into the home, or getting placed into a home. And I know that even in my own household, that's something that, we've been pretty much told, only as a last resort, because we was kind of like our independence and all along those lines and everything. So I just wondered how much of that is what created this matriarch film.
Oh, all of it, really. It all really transpired through just watching the relationship between my grandmother on my father's side. I call her Granny, so that's how I distinguish Granny as my father's mom, and Grandma is my mother's mom. And so it was just out of watching Granny um, take in and nurture and support my eldest uncle, her oldest son, who had suffered a stroke some years ago, over 10 years ago. And he ended up going over there instead of being placed in a home. And she welcomed the situation, uh, put on that identity of the old the old mother again, the mother who was in service and in nurture and in care of her children. So she put that hat back on, um, and all of that for me was inspiring. But I also saw the sort of the dynamic that was at play when an older man needs to be cared for in that light, by his mother. And so there were times where um there were times where there was a bit of like contentious energy, um and when I would see that, I'm obviously standing on the outside looking in, because I didn't personally know what my uncle was going through. I could only theorize based upon how I might feel myself.
Yeah.
Um, and so I initially I wanted to make a narrative, just a fiction film, just kind of about this relationship, because I was a bit adverse to putting them on camera. And as I was developing the idea, I had a great conversation with a good friend of mine in New York. His name is Tariq Holloway. He's a fashion designer, but also uh, business owner and everything like that. But he was telling me, he said, you know, nothing is more interesting than real life.
Right.
And I was like, you think so? So I'll say I sat back and I thought about it, and I felt that he was right. So I addressed my family and asked them how they would feel, because my granny is quite adverse to being on in front of the camera, and in fact, she hates pictures. Always did, and I was a bit worried about that. Um, but I think what that did is it opened up a specific doorway for her, another way to communicate and tell a story and talk about things that she had never really spoken about, to me. I know specifically, um my granny is she's a sociable person. She loves to she loves to entertain, and she enjoys conversation. And so I think her and that camera, when she's engaging with it directly, open things up. And so it just, for me, I was like, okay, well, I think there's something here. And also just the idea that everyone's getting older. Um, and as I talked to other people about what I was doing, I realized a lot of people didn't have their grandparents. They didn't have them growing up. A lot of people didn't have camcorders. They weren't doing
Right.
home videos. So the only thing that they had were maybe old pictures, things like that, which are always great. But um, down the line when we're speaking generational, you look at these pictures and they really just offer like that two-dimensional connection. Um, so there's just something quite granular about the idea of watching it in motion, hearing, um, it opens up that the feeling, it opens up the connection a bit deeper. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to like have something that that could just be there, and I could pass on to my kids, and they can pass on to their kids, and so be it. And the family can have something, an heirloom.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and definitely that's a powerful thing you're saying about leaving that heirloom, and it's actually part of that I want to get to
Mhm.
as well and everything. But part of the film also addressed something that I know a lot of people are afraid to admit, that there's something that goes on in our society. It doesn't matter whether it's African American or any of the societies that exist, European American, Asian American, and a number of others, which is this notion that we all hope to go in sequential order, meaning that I know that every parent hopes that they will outlive their kids, and definitely every grandparent hopes that they will outlive your parents, and all along those lines. So definitely the notion of going sequentially. But I know within the film there was the notion of losing somebody that is definitely
Mhm.
of a different generation and a younger generation. So I was just wondering how much was that narrative part of the narrative that you were trying to tell in the film, because that is something that I can only imagine. I unlike you, I don't have any kids, but I have two nephews, and I just know I would be devastated if my brother called me and told me that it was something that happened to either one of those two,
Mhm.
as I don't have any kids of my own and everything. But I can only imagine what a parent would go through going through that, and it doesn't matter whether it happens when they're young, which is definitely a tragedy in of itself, or whether it happens later in the life, which is definitely probably more prevalent, but definitely something that happens in our society. Just as we get older, sometimes our parents outlive us and all in that space, but they're not ready necessarily for it. So I just wonder how much is that narrative part of the film as well? Because when I watched the film, I was like, whoa, that's really deep, and that's something that we've all faced at some point or another, either directly or indirectly through our friend and family circles.
Oh yeah. All right. So let me clarify one thing first. So I don't have kids,
Okay,
not yet. Um, but I do hope to at some
got
point, and be able to pass it down. But I'm not there yet. So I'm in the same boat as you, Mark. Just
you.
but uh yeah, no, that's actually a big part of my family story. And so it was something, that thing is quite weighty, right? And it is something that I spoke about, when I was interviewing all three matriarchs in the film. Both of my grandmothers have lost kids, and my mom, she lost a son. My older brother passed when he was 28. I was 18.
Gotcha.
He died of cancer, and that's the story of most of my grandmother's kids, my mom's siblings. I don't want to mess up the math, but she's lost quite a few siblings to cancer. And on my granny's side, she lost one son. Um, and so it's like you have three women that have experienced that, and I knew that it was a part of their story, it was a part of their identity. But because that thing is so weighty, I didn't want this film to, one, be so bogged down by the details of all of that. And then also, two, I think quite often, like, black women are, uh they carry the weight of this title of the strong black
Yeah.
woman, right? And I didn't want this film to sort of dive in that direction, and people walk away as, oh my god, those are so strong, all the women so strong. Yeah, they are, but the conversation is much bigger than that. And also, like, joy is always experienced. It's not just experienced in the morning. These are women that experience joy in their past life and their present life. um and then joy comes in the morning. And so I wanted this film to be more of a celebratory note, more about the active sense of service that all of them were involved in at the time of filming. But I knew it had to be addressed. My mom addressed it a little bit when she talks about, um, I asked her if they had the conversations about losing kids and how all of that felt and going through that experience. And I was quite surprised to find out that they didn't, that those weren't conversations that they had. It was just about action. It was just about being there for each other. So my mom in the film says they didn't talk about losing kids as parents, but her mom was always there when my brother was sick, going to the hospital, talking to her every day. And so for her, my mom, it's like she cared for me through the process. So she knew what it felt like. And that's why she was there. That's why she cared for me and held me through the process. And so now the takeaway from my mom is that that's that type of service, that type of care is what resonates. That's what people walk away with. And so she ended up being there for my grandmother when my grandmother needed care. And that was how that transpired. Um, so with my granny, I talked about it. We actually talked about it in depth with the interview. It was the first time she really went into that time period of losing my uncle. His name was Clifford, and my uncle Clifford, he was a homosexual man, and that was very tough for my grandparents. And he died of AIDS, and that was even tougher. And so, you have what all of that represented back in the 80s. My uncle died in 87. And so, of course, my granny's looking at this as like the quote unquote gay cancer, I think is what they called it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I remember as a kid, I would ask her about this uncle that was not present, you know. Um, and she would say, "Oh, he was sick." And of course, as a kid, I don't really, I don't understand energy or tone.
Right.
So I said, "Sick? What do you mean sick?" Because my idea of sick is having a cold. Uh,
Right.
and she's like, "He was just sick." And I'm like, okay, well, he was just sick, and that was my takeaway for many years. He was just sick. Many years I didn't follow up like what that meant. I just took it. And I remember one day I'm just going through pictures. I think I was in high school.
Mhm.
I was going through pictures, and there was a photo of my uncle Clifford and my mom and someone else. I think they were by poolside or somewhere,
Mhm.
like on vacation doing whatever they were doing. And I don't know what it was. I have no, and maybe it was him, the spirit
Yeah.
of him, but it hit me like a bag of bricks. I'm looking at this photo and I was like, I wonder if this I wonder if he was a gay man, because there was so much resistance all of my years of just being curious about my uncle. There was so much resistance from my grandparents. Um, I didn't talk too much to my grandfather about it. My grandfather was a man of very few words, but so much resistance from my granny, who was not a woman of few words. Uh, and I remember going to my mother and I asked her, "Was my uncle gay?" And she said, "What makes you ask that?" And I said, "Oh, it's this picture. I don't know why. I just don't know." And she was like, "Yes." And then I asked her, "Did he die of AIDS?" And she said, "Yes." And so I went back to my granny and I asked her that question, "Did
Mhm.
he die of AIDS?" And she said, um, "He died from making bad decisions."
Okay.
And that was the end of it. So when I had the camera and I had the crew, I brought in a film crew for like 5 days out of all of my filming. Um, and this was during the pandemic. It was a very small crew and we had to be very safe. But she opened up because there were new people around, and she told me the whole story, and I was like, "Wow." Um,
Well,
she
along
told
those same lines and everything, I was just curious because I know one of the things that I had heard because my parents actually had a radio station in rural North Carolina, and that would have been in the mid '70s to the early '80s, and one of the poster childs of some of that coverage of early AIDS. I think
mm,
Warren was his name, if I'm remembering correctly, was actually featured when AIDS first came out because he was definitely a gay man as well, and he was part of this very liberal because my parents are very liberal people in general and everything
mhm,
station. They definitely had people that were from different backgrounds and different sorts that were part of this minority radio station in the rural North Carolina area and everything. But I do remember that Warren was part of that station. I think that's the name, if I'm remembering, like I said
mm,
correctly. And then there was also a lady that was working with Leonard Peltier, who I think is still in prison and everything, who is an Indian activist and all in that space. But definitely there was that kind of notion. But in terms of the gay conversation, there was a lot of we won't ask and we don't want you to tell kind of attitude,
yes.
which is what I think is
Oh,
from your parents and everything. So definitely that was that kind of even resonated in some of the discussion that I heard in the movie. It was kind of this attitude of like, don't don't tell us and we won't ask you.
yeah, exactly. You know, I just didn't, I really don't understand it. I think as people of color, there are just so many things that we hide. There's so many things that we don't talk about, you know, um, whether it's what some people consider to be transgressions, lifestyles. We don't talk about health often enough. Um, we certainly don't talk about the end of life.
Right.
What are we going to do? Are all things wrapped up? We rarely have these conversations, I think, is with our families. And and it hurts, and it puts people in bad positions. Like if something tragic happens and you don't have these discussions and you're trying to figure out, well, what to do, what was left behind, what needs to, what cords need to be wrapped up, things like that. So yeah,
It's interesting you bring that up because as you were bringing that up, I was thinking to myself how many people, myself probably included in this list I'm going to mention everything,
mm,
don't really necessarily have those end of life preparations and everything. Because as a friend of
mhm,
mine says, we all know our birth date. We may not know our end date, but we
yeah,
know that there is an end date there at some point or another. But I do know that in our society, well, we hate going to the doctor in general, and there's a lot of people that are not prepared for whatever that end will be, which then brings up what you're talking about, which is if that end happens and you don't have your insurance papers in order, you don't have your arrangements in order, then they've got to scramble to try to guess what you want to have done and everything. And when at the end, it may not even have been what you wanted and all in that space. So I do urge people to make those decisions and everything because you're right. A lot of times we are not prepared for the linear nature of life, which means that there's a beginning, which means that there's got to be an end.
it
Like
has
I
to be.
jokingly say on this show all the time, and not just this show, but other shows, that I'm going for 200, but I'm not doing anything to actually encourage getting to 200 because I know that I eat out way too much, I eat out fast food way too much, don't do nearly enough exercise, and all along those lines. So I know that what it takes to get to 200, technically, I'm not doing and all in that space. And then, like I said, but then again, if you watch like the Weatherman and those folks on the channels and they ask them, well, you're a centurion or you're a centurion in 10 and everything. How did you get there? And have 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, well, I had a fifth of liquor or I had just
Yep.
smoked 8 packs a day or I'm still out there womanizing or a number of other things. They're all supposed to be things that you're not supposed to be doing to get there and everything. But it's always fascinating when I hear those interviews by it's usually the weatherman of the national channels where they're interviewing those folks and all along those lines. You're going like, huh? How did you manage to get that at that point and everything? There was another thing that I noticed, and I don't know if I didn't get a chance to tell you this at the film festival and everything, but I am a lover of music and everything along those lines, having had that radio station that my parents started, and definitely a lover of jazz music, also a lover of blues. And I do hear you got that Chicago background, so I'm sure you probably have a knowledge of folks like B.B. King and Coco Taylor, who's no longer with us, and Buddy Guy, and a number of
Yep.
others that definitely had that kind of Chicago roots and everything. And one of the things that I noticed, and I'm actually going to pull up a clip because Tara gave me access, so I can actually pull up the beginning and everything, and then I'm going to play another part that's at the end and everything. But one of the things that I
Yeah.
noticed is that one of the narratives that I noticed within the film and everything is that there is a lot of musical ties there as well. So there definitely seems to be a musical theme. I mean, you started off with the birthday theme, and that's actually what I'm going to bring up at the beginning, if that's all right with you. And then there's a
Yeah.
scene toward the middle or toward the end that is very gospel oriented, and that's the other part that I was going to grab and everything. But I was just wondering as I get ready to do a share screen and let folks check out the beginning of the scene that starts off with the birthday, and then I'm going to get to the other part that features the part that is definitely very gospel oriented, and definitely
Mhm.
while gospel is not my musical forte all the time, I'm still a lover of gospel, and particularly some old fashioned gospel and all in that space. I do remember there was a part in the film where the young lady is basically, or and I'm using that term loosely and everything, singing and giving her gospel music vibe on and all along those lines. So I just wanted to give folks a chance to see this and hear a little bit of what I'm talking about. And definitely, I'll start off with the birthday scene and all in that space. But definitely, I was just wondering if you could just share a little bit after we hear this little bit of a clip, the importance of that musical narrative and how that musical narrative was very much an important part of this story and everything along those lines. So if you hold on, we'll get the beginning part and
Yeah.
all in that space.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. May God bless you. May God bless you. May God bless.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for all that the team is doing as we get through this pandemic. These daily updates are critical in keeping Illinois informed.
Yeah, when I got up this morning, I was on 100. Yes, I know I couldn't help but to thank him because he the one did. Mm.
Since we couldn't have your party, we having it here.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mama looking from phone to phone. Bobby, Ann, she can't see you, Bobby. Oh, okay. Uh-huh. Yeah, let me show y'all the decoration from all of us for her. Mama said she was glad she could see y'all. We all couldn't be in the same city, but we all here in spirit.
Now, before I get to the other part and everything, that was just a little clip to give folks a taste of what that was all about. And then I'm going to get to the other part that I'm curious about and everything. But you definitely, within the film, talked about something that I'm curious to hear more conversation about as well, which is this notion of the power of the internet and the power of social media and all along those lines. Because as I mentioned earlier, my mom sometimes will check on me and my brother, and we are not spring chickens. I'm in that whole late, early 60 range and everything, but she'll still check on me and my younger brothers who's in his late 50s, or actually joking that this year he'll be the speed limit of 55, depending on where you are in New York City and everything along those lines and everything. But I do know that she's not a big social media person, but she will sometimes jump on other people's social media in order to check on what we're up to and all in that space. And I know that that is very common for folks that are not necessarily internet savvy, particularly among some of our older folks and everything. So I was just wondering. And then, like I said, my aunt, she might even jump on my late aunt, or one of my there's only one late aunt, but my late aunt account and all in that space, or she may jump on some other social media accounts to do what I call internet spying and all in that space. So I just wanted your nature of the social media and all along those lines, because like I said, she's 100, and I mentioned earlier those people that are 100. Sometimes they'll tell you the things that they did that got them to 100. I was curious if, within the interview, if she revealed her secrets to making it to 100.
uh, so the social media, it became extremely extremely important, for sure. just and not just social media, but I guess just the technological advances in general. I mean, I remember the first time I saw the commercial for FaceTime, and I was like, I was like, why in what world? I already don't want to be on the phone, as it is, but in what world do I want to see your face on my phone? That was my first thought. But then it got to a point where, especially in the pandemic, I mean, you saw the necessity of it. And it shows in the film. You go, and this was a partnership. Like, these decisions was certainly a partnership between me and my editor, John Proctor, out of New York. We were discussing like structure of this, and what is the sort of the narrative of the mother, right? um and so we were just looking at like this high point of celebration and joy in the home video, and her having all of her daughters around her, with the exception of one who had passed at that time. And you got cut from that, and now she's 100, and because of the pandemic, no one can be around except for my mom lived 5 minutes away, just around the corner. And it just made sense for my mom to be the one to be there, check in on her, make sure everything's okay. um and so you see that my aunts are on, one aunt lives in Chicago, but because of the pandemic and concepts of safety and what's not safe, she has to FaceTime in, and my aunt's in Atlanta. She has to FaceTime in, and it's just the two of them. That those are the two remaining aunts living. Um, and so yeah, it became essential to my grandmother feeling celebrated, because my grandmother in life always wanted to make 100. That was her thing. She wants to be 100, and she wants to check out once she's made 100. And she was very honest about that. um and her thing to make it 100, I think I did ask her, what's the secret. um and she just says the secret is living a good life. That was what she would say: live a good life. um and it I mean, I couldn't, like you said, sometimes you look at like people's diets, things like that. My grandmother, she was born in Cleveland, but she grew up in Mississippi. So it's more natural eating. But that's not to say, like, she's eating soul food like the rest of us. She loved bacon. That's what she loved, was bacon. And so I don't know. It's like you said, man. Sometimes some people get it, and sometimes some people don't.
That's
Some
very
people
true.
love to die at 28. But you see people who smoke cigarettes, maybe 2, 3 packs a day for however many years, and they're still here. It's a roll of the dice. I don't know. You just kind of have to just live good, be a good person, and just hope that the cards play out for you,
That makes a lot of sense and everything. One of the things we've been talking about, we've been talking about it is hate and everything, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, because this is another thing you kind of alluded to in the film. And actually, I'm going to get to that other clip, because this plays into this clip that I'm going to bring that's toward the end of the film and everything, which is another scene clip, but it's also got pictures and everything, which is sometimes we are not the best people in terms of keeping the records of things that we do and everything along those lines. I know that even at the center, there have been a number of amazing events that have taken place in the past, and there were people that were taking pictures during that time. Like, we had Dick Gregory come in, like I think it was the late 90s, and give a lecture at a time that the center was actually being renovated, so it didn't look like what you came into, and all along those lines, because it was not the initial renovation, but a later renovation, and definitely several decades back and everything. Because like I said, I think it was like around 97, definitely before 9/11, and all in that space, which would have been the early 2000s. But definitely that took place. He spoke, and there were people that took pictures and were there, but I don't know that there was necessarily a record of those pictures. So I'm actually trying to dig into finding people that were there, just like I'm trying to find people that were at the time that Ruby Dee came and Ozzie Davis surprised her, because it was actually when she was doing
To the
My
best.
One Good Nerve and everything along those lines, and it was around their anniversary. So actually, he surprised her by appearing at her play, because I want to say it was the sorority, which might be the Deltas if I remember correctly, that she is part of, that sponsored that play and everything. And it was near their anniversary, so he literally popped in to surprise her on the anniversary time. And I know there were some cameras and things going on at that time, and maybe even been some video cameras, but still trying to track that down, just like trying to track down when Roberta Flack came, and that might have been in the crossover of the millennial, like around the year 2000 or
So
something
this is
like that. But
at Hayti. They came
this was
to.
all at Hayti, yes.
Wow. Wow.
So we're trying to track down some of those pictures and everything, because, like I said, a lot of times these are things that aren't necessarily thought about at that particular time. So now it's a matter of trying to backtrack and get them. So I was just wondering
Yeah.
your thoughts around the importance of us, even on the family history, because that same group that I was talking about, the kids, one of the gentlemen that has been coming regularly is Earl Imes, who is a historian, and he's been getting the kids to write down and understand their family history. So that's actually a course that he is teaching around genealogy and all in that space. So he's definitely trying to get the kids to understand that they need to understand that family history and write down the narrative that they can get from their parents or their grandparents. But I
Mhm.
sometimes get frustrated, not just with the center, but just in general, that we don't do enough of that and everything. Because I've even mentioned my aunt, who was kind of the keeper of the family records and everything. But I just wondering your thoughts around that and the importance of that, even within the film.
Oh, keeping a record, a
Yes.
visual record. It's I think it's pertinent. There's I believe this is an African proverb. Don't hate me if it isn't, but what's the saying? If the lion doesn't tell its story, the hunter will.
Yes.
It's absolutely. I think it's a necessity to document, to archive. Um, History, the history of people, and the history of your people. I'll take my grandmother, for instance. My grandmother raised 11 kids, and my grandmother is a product of the South. So she was what many would consider to be a stern woman, right?
Mhm.
Um, but you look back at it, it's um, you're a woman who, one, has experienced certain traumas. Two, she lost her first husband, um, tragic accident,
Mm.
and now she's a single mother. I think she had 8 kids at the time, and then she remarried. So you're raising 11 kids, um, in the South, at a time where raising Black kids is I mean, it's an act of revolution, right? You're bringing
Mhm.
Black children into this world, um, at towards the end of the Jim Crow period, transitioning into the civil rights period. This is an act of revolution, and you have to teach these kids how to survive in the South, in Mississippi. Um, so there's sometimes you have to have a stern hand. But if there aren't pictures of the joy, if there aren't pictures of her laughing, pictures of other people around her laughing, pictures, there's a photo I have in the film of her sitting, all like she has and not even all of her grandkids, but there were like 20 grandkids standing around her, and she has a grandkid in her lap. Um, and that's a picture of joy, right? If you don't see all of these, or if the movie isn't there, and then people go up and they start telling stories about, uh oh, she with me or whatever, these stories of sternness, then you'll walk away and you'll say, man, that was a mean woman. No, this is a woman that's concerned with safety. This is a woman who's concerned with, as she says, live good, live right. That's how she made 100. So she's trying to institute a structure
Mhm.
as a matriarch. She's trying to institute structure the best way she knows how. And so I think that that's, for me, like, that's the important of documentation. People just run off and say whatever they want about you. Um, But if the evidence isn't there of the actual person that you are, or like the evidence of Hayti, you know,
Mhm.
um, it is in the world of like film festivals, right? It is
Mhm.
what some people would call a regional festival.
Mhm.
It is what some people might call a small festival, right? Um, Anyone who's not a part of the community, you can go to the center and it's a beautiful center. But some people might look at it and say, oh, it's an unassuming center, an unassuming building, right? Even it's a gorgeous building and beautiful, beautiful on the inside and outside, beautiful people connected to it. Um, but some filmmakers, you might go from Sundance to Hayti,
Mhm.
and if you're not connected to the spirit of us, right? You'll go from Sundance and then you'll say, "Man, I was just at Sundance, and it's all this, everything. It's so much. It might even make you dizzy."
Mhm.
Um, and then you go and you come to Hayti, and it's the one building. It's the two rooms where films are happening with one main theater where films are
Mhm.
happening, right? Um, and if you're not plugged into the people, or if you're not plugged into the history, I think it's amazing to hear that R.C. Davis was
Mhm.
there. Um, it's amazing to hear Roberta Flack was there. Uh, and you realize, like, oh yeah, this is I when I was there, I was hearing a lot about Durham arts, the scene,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, the Black arts scene,
Right.
and how significant that is for the state of North Carolina, how significant the city of Durham is in terms of Black arts in North Carolina. And so it makes sense that Ruby Dia be there at Hayti doing a play. Of course,
And even the
you know.
filmmakers, like I said, Dick Gregory was there. I think that was the fourth year of the film festival. So he was actually there in an early incarnation of the film festival. And even though he was speaking recently toward a one of his other films and everything, but Holly Garema, who did the film Sankofa, was actually
Mhm.
at one of the past film festivals. And then a good friend of mine has been to two or three of those. But if you're familiar with the film This Christmas, Ronnie
Yeah,
Warner is actually from North Carolina. So he's actually from the North Carolina area. So he's actually been, I want to say, three or four times because he's actually a personal friend of mine and everything. So he's actually come a few times. And even the first time that Tyra was curating it, and she was curating it with a friend of mine, Bill C. Davis, they actually had Cedric Pendleton. So many people know him from House of Pain and all along those lines. So there have been
mhm,
folks that recognize that history and that importance and everything. And there was even a young lady, I think it might have been one of the young ladies from the Bahamas or one of the other Caribbean nations that was there. It was talking about what you just said, which is the personality of the building and the feeling of the building. So I was just wondering, what was the vibe that you got as a, I think this was maybe your first time to the Hayti. So what was your vibe that you got? Because I do know that when our closing ceremony, one of the young ladies was talking about how she could feel the essence of the history just being in the building and everything. But I was wondering your
yeah.
take on being there as part of what was part of the Black Wall Street, because that was one of the original churches there and everything. I just wondered your initial impact or thought as you came into that building and realized what the nature of that particular building is.
Sure, sure. It's so funny, right? Because I got there, I stepped into the building while a screening was at play. It was just the nature of when I got in town and when I was able to get over to the building. So I knew that I had missed this one screening, like I missed the beginning of it. So it was happening when I walked in. And so I walk in and you had a couple of the volunteers behind the table, like doing the sign-ins and everything like that. There was the table where a beautiful young lady was selling merchandise. But outside of that, like you have the red carpet and the backdrop. Outside of
Right.
that, the lobby was fairly empty, right? So I kind of came in and I was, I got my bag and everything, but I didn't know where to turn from there because I was like, "Damn, where's everybody?" But then the door to the theater opened, and everybody was in the screenings, and that's what you want out of a film festival. You want everyone in the screening. That's the whole point of the situation. And so it right then and there, I was like, oh, this is a festival that gets like actual engagement and support from the people in the community, the people who are interested in watching films and engaging with films, because it was a flood. Everybody came out of the theater, and I was like, oh, okay, here are the people. Now let's get it going. Let's get it cracking. And then there's a back room
Mhm.
where there were even more merchandisers, and it was like all African based, right? All Afro centric, and that was so cool to see. And everybody was so warm. And I went upstairs is like where they have the classrooms,
Yeah.
and there was a workshop happening. I
Yes.
believe there was the works in progress
Right.
uh program that was happening. And so you had like filmmaker teachers that was up there. I believe it was Randy Dotton, a filmmaker out of New York, and Rosita Cox, who's a filmmaker from North Carolina and based in Charlotte right now. And so it was just like once the people like came and disengaged from the screening, like the films went off, um, everybody started talking, and then the food trucks outside, like um being connected to the culinary scene in Durham. I had the most amazing vegan oyster po' boy I've ever had in my life. I was like, what is what is this? Like this. And then I went across the street. There were two soul restaurants across the street,
Yeah. Yes.
in this kitchen, and oh my god, I can't it's something deli. I feel like I'm blanking out on, and I hate
Might
that.
have been in Zynga's.
We're in Zynga's kitchen, but then there's
Right.
another one, maybe like 2-3 doors down.
Yeah.
All good food, and I hate that I can't give them a shout out because I just blanked out. But um, that whole strip was it was such a dope strip, and in fact, like I went into the second place, had a great meal, and the people were telling me like, "Oh man, you should go downtown. There's this place and this bar and that bar. We might be out there tonight. We're gonna be going. We might be going to this place." And I was like, "All right, cool. Let's get it in." So yeah, man, it was like that's what it is. Like
Did you
for
have any idea before you came here about the nature of Black Wall Street? And they are correct. There are a number of restaurants that have popped up in the area. Matter of fact, a
Mhm.
friend of mine has opened up a new jazz club that just actually had Malcolm Jamal Warner there. I think that was not this past weekend, but the weekend before and everything. And of course, there are established ones that have been here for a while, like BU Cafe and the Blue Note Grill, and a number of others that are definitely having kind of that Chicago vibe, and there's been a rebirth in downtown Durham. But I'm just wondering,
Mhm.
had you heard about the history of Black Wall Street and that historical period that existed prior to the '60s, and some of this rebirth from as far away as Chicago, and even having family members or Atlanta, or was this a new knowledge that you were just gathering for the first time coming down here?
The Black Wall Street in Durham
Yeah,
specifically.
in Durham,
In
yes.
Durham. I did not as much as the one in Nebraska, but um there was I don't know what happened to this project, but there was supposed to be this film project, this documentary that was being done by a group of filmmakers who they do quite prominent work. Um, and I had gotten a call because one of the cities that they were looking at was Chicago. So they were looking at Chicago, Atlanta, and uh, North Carolina. It might have been Durham. I think it was. And that was my first time hearing about it and looking a little bit into it. And in fact, it wasn't even. It was there for Atlanta. It was Atlanta, but there was also like there's this area in Georgia that a bunch of black people have bought all this land and like creating their own situation. But this was in maybe like 2021 where I first heard about this. So Yeah, it's not history that is like that's super out there. That's super loud, and it should be like that. That history should really be out there.
No, it definitely needs to be out there and everything. One of the things I was curious about Donald and everything is definitely, and you kind of alluded to it even with the matriarch and everything. How important do you think it is for filmmakers to be doing works that are telling not just our story, but in some cases being advocates and everything along those lines? Because definitely, I think that the filmmaker and just the creative community in general can be advocates. And I know that sometimes people get upset because there was that whole notion around critical race theory and a number of other things when people are being overly political, but I don't have any problem with that because I think that, like you said earlier, there's stories that have to be told that aren't always told and everything. But I just wanted your take on the notion of using art as a tool for advocacy.
Ah, um, I do tend to believe that it's important, but y- sometimes I can be 50-50 on um the responsibilities that are levied on artists sometimes because this art form is, I mean, it is terribly difficult. It really is an exhausting art form, and it's a expensive art form. And sometimes some days I understand the people that are like, man, I just want to have fun. I just like I want to I want to make a comedy. I want to make people laugh and go to sleep. Sometimes I understand that. And sometimes I understand because it is some, this is quite a nefarious industry at times, and so some people kind of fear being able to speak openly about their beliefs. Sometimes you fear that that might shut you down, that might shut down certain opportunities that you're looking forward to. And I've seen it happen for people. And for me personally, I do feel like it's important, I think, to engage politically, and to be active about that, to be vocal about that, because that is how you affect change. And for me, I like to view art as I mean, I guess I would say political, for lack of a better word, but I view art um uh as some flag that you're taking up, right? It's a message that you want to get out, even if it's laughter, right? For me, black joy is also revolutionary. And
Mhm.
so if it is just I just want to get out there and I just want to make people laugh, um then great, because it's like can be so hard. And so if that's your mission and you're doing it, then it's a beautiful mission. It's a beautiful mission for me to walk in a room and see my parents hugged up and laughing because they're watching, Eddie Murphy, or whoever they're watching. They were watching last last time I saw, they were watching Eddie Murphy's last film, Candy Cane Lane.
Mhm.
You don't like, this is not a movie where you look at and you're like, oh man, it's a very political movie. It's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, there's a black couple, older black couple, that are sharing a blanket and sharing laughs. And sometimes sometimes I do feel like we find ourselves in position looking at this overarching system, right, that's been put together to distinguish classes in this country. And sometimes I feel like that system is trying to work to break families up. And this is so it becomes a revolutionary act to create joy, create laughter. That's how I look at it. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't like. I'm not the person that's like, man, you should be out there, like you should say something. You should be about something. I don't really try to force that on people too
No,
much.
it makes a lot of sense, and definitely that's not what this film is all about and everything. But I just wondered, were there any comparisons made? And this may sound like an unusual question, but it is kind of where his basis came out as well, and a lot of people have definitely noticed the matriarch element of this particular filmmaker that I'm going to mention. And I have not always been a big fan of his, and I've said that on this show and other shows
Mhm.
in the past, even though I've grown to have a greater admiration for what he's done as there I understood more of his own family history. It's just that the early parts of the film, I was a little bit too concerned about the step infection aspect, but I was just wondering, have there been comparisons made, even though this is in a narrative kind of like experimental documentary format, to some of the Tyler Perry type movies, because Tyler was also very much about the matriarch element as well. So that's where I was going with that question and everything. So I just wondering if folks realize the parallels there as well, because if you study Tyler's history and everything, he definitely acknowledges the matriarch element in his own growth and all along those lines. So I was just wondering if any of your film critics or film observers had noted that parallel, or am I that first person to recognize that?
Never. You are the first person. You are the first person to put me in conversation with Tyler Perry. No, it's not happening. I could see where you're going in terms of like the religion, in terms of family, like those themes that are
Right.
present, and it's certainly like Black women.
Right.
No, no, I I'm yeah, I'm like you. I'm not the biggest Tyler Perry content fan, but I respect that man's business savvy, and I respect his boldness for like, this is what he wants to do. This is the content. This is his audience, and he's just that's just what it is, and he doesn't care about anyone's opinions against the matter. Because I think it is like it is the type of industry that demands some sort of boldness, right?
Right.
Uh, because it replicates like what the country is. This country is not the biggest fan of anything or anyone in the middle.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's kind of where I was making the parallel, because that's what
mhm.
I'm saying is that where I have gained more respect for him versus where I used to be at and everything. I'm still not the biggest fan of the Medea concept, even though I got some friends who are big Medea fans and everything. But I did see where he used that power, and I've seen that with other filmmakers as well, where you use it to make the revenue, because it is definitely a revenue generator, and then you are able to turn around and do a film like Hidden Figures, or do a film like his
Mhm.
latest one, which I think is more of a romantic kind of murder kind of deal and everything. But definitely, he's able to do some things that are more narrative driven, for lack of a better term, and it might even be more politically focused versus what he did with Medea and everything. So that's where I was kind of like going, is that sometimes it comes back to what you were saying about the politics, and sometimes you have to uh, do something that you might not be even the biggest fan of and everything, in order to get the platform to do what you want to do and everything. Because I've had that
Yeah.
conversation with my friend Ronnie and everything. Because like I said, he did This Christmas, but he also did Puff Puff Pass, which is basically like an African American version of what the Cheech and Chong's films were and everything along those lines. But and
Some
now he's working on some other things that are more uh of a different ilk and aren't necessarily that kind of commercial driven kind of ilk and everything. But I just
Oh
wanted
yeah.
your thoughts about that.
I mean, sometimes sometimes it's necessary. I'm not talking about necessary in the terms of like selling out, because I think selling out really is the act of doing something that you truly don't believe in. So you're selling out to yourself. I don't like selling out to a wide group of people. For me, is not a thing. Because you just can't make everyone happy. You can try, but you'll end up being the most hated person in the room by trying to
Right.
make people happy. That's just it. It's just that sort of odd conundrum of being a human being. Um, and so you have to stick to what you believe in, and we're all very, very different. Yeah, like it's funny that you mentioned the Medea movies. Uh, for me, I enjoy the Medea movies more than I enjoy like when he goes into serious drama. For me, that's kind of when it doesn't really work. Um, and he started off with the Medea. That was how he grew his audience, going
Right.
around, and it was the Medea character on stage, in the quote unquote Chitlin circuit, right? As
Mhm.
they like to name it. Um, that was the essence.
Right.
Sometimes it translates on the screen. He seems extremely comfortable, and you know, and people go out and they start talking about the emasculation of the black male, Tyler putting on a dress, or Kevin Hart or Martin Lawrence putting on a dress. You know, one of my favorite movies is Mrs. Doubtfire. Robin
Mhm,
Williams putting on a
mhm.
dress. Love the film. No one says a thing. You know, we
Right.
all love Mrs. Doubtfire. So yeah, I mean, Tyler put on a dress and he was extremely funny in that dress. He's extremely funny as that character. I'm not sitting here salivating over the next Medea movie. I'm not sitting here waiting for it. I'm just saying I've I laughed. I enjoyed the character. And sometimes those films work a little better than um his other forays into the art form.
Speaking
Um
of other forays and everything, and I hear where you're going down and everything, but I'm just curious because one of the things that, and I'm going to mention another popular actor and everything that really shocked me is that, and this isn't so much with the matriarch and everything, but
mhm.
it's really interesting when you see filmmakers that decide to make what I consider almost like two films in one. Because I am, and
Mm.
my dad pointed it out to me when I was much younger, so he's probably close to my age now. So he might have been 60 or something along those lines. I was probably in my 40s at this particular time, but he invited me and my younger brother to come and watch a particular film that Eddie Murphy was part of. And then as we were watching the film, he got us to understand there was really two films in one. And yes, I'm talking about Shrek, because there's definitely the
Oh,
film that we all know as a kids film and all along those lines. But there was just a very serious adult content that is interwoven into Shrek that only if you're an adult will you pay attention to. And we've seen that with a number of films. So I just wanted your thoughts about this kind of newer type of film that is out there that is supposed to be a kid film in general, but it might have some overtones of other things as well from an adult standpoint. So you can watch it, and I know you don't have kids, but if you are to get kids and they decide to watch a Trek film with you, they can get the kid element of it, and you can watch there and see the subtle overtones that are going over there that might have some serious adult tones in it as well. Because, like I said, my dad literally came over and said, "Y'all got to check this movie out," and that's what the movie was. It was, I think, the original Shrek, and all in that space. So I just wanted your take on that.
I love that. I love that. You know, I love that you can like operate within the space of double entendres in film.
Yes.
And I like in the industry, we call certain things like Easter eggs, right?
Right.
We put in these certain things that mean something to us, and it's just in the film, and it's not really spoken of. It's not really addressed. Many times, you don't. The audience has no idea that it's there, and so like this, you call it the two films in one. Um, I remember learning that Disney had been doing this
Mhm.
for a very long time. They're like you see like certain memes or certain images that are like shared over social media, the 2D animation, and they'll stop at a certain frame, and it's like you know, like it might be an inappropriate image of you know, your genitals or something on a character, anything like that, and it's just a frame, right?
Mhm.
It's a flip that the artist just had a little fun with. And it's this time where, of course, it's a conservative society back in the 40s or the 50s. So now it's less conservative, and so you can play around with like, I'm gonna make this movie that's interesting and engaging for kids, but I know the kids don't have the money. Who's going to bring them? So we need to make this thing enjoyable also for the adult viewing audience. You can have fun, and then you also make more money. That's just uh
No,
yeah, it's
that makes a lot of sense.
I'm all for it.
No, that
Yeah,
makes
I'm
a lot
all
of sense.
for it.
But the other danger that happens, and I'm gonna mention another film and everything that from a commercial standpoint is, do you
Uh,
ever fear that there will be films out there that are such commercial successes that we wind up just getting the remakes of them and all along those lines? Because I know that there were several, and I alluded to it earlier, versions of the Wild Wild West, including the one with Will Smith. And while I enjoyed the first, I guess it's been two versions now of Wakanda and everything, that there are some people that are afraid that at some point we might getting to the point where they're like, "Yeah, just make another Black Panther movie," because Hollywood does like to remake what they see is making money and everything. So I'm sure there are probably some meetings going on with the gatekeepers and all of that space about like, let's come up with the next version of Wakanda Forever and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take on that, because Hollywood does like to reinvent itself over and over again, and sometimes they overly reinvent themselves.
Oh man, I mean, yeah, it's exhausting. It is. I get it with this industry. A lot of it, we're selling products. At the end of the day, we are selling, marketing, distributing products. Um, so but yeah, I mean, like, why are we on the 10th version of Fast and the Furious, right? And to the point where like the one of the main stars has passed on. Like this brother's in another reality now. He's an ancestor, and we are still making Fast and the Furious films. Um, and that for me, I think that gets to be that's when I feel the ridiculousness of it. When
But
things are still being like people are dying as the things are still being made. That's when it's like, all right, maybe we need to.
But speaking of ridiculous, Donald, I gotta get y'all this one. I gotta ask you about this. I mean, I get it, but aren't you also sometimes frustrated when you see the umpteenth version of a TV show? Well, I will give Queen Latifah all kinds of credit. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was watching it yesterday, and I actually think that is a decent version of The Equalizer. But I don't know that and I don't mind the second version of The Equalizer, because that's a different twist on the original Equalizer, but I don't know that we need another version with basically the same type of characters of the Love Boat, and we have got that, or a repeat of Fantasy Island. These things were successful back in the 70s and in the 80s and everything. But do we need another version of Charlie's Angels? Do we need another version? And I think I've heard rumors that there might be one coming of Three's Company and all along those lines. So do we need these kind of like remakes? Because you mentioned your dad was a TV fan and everything. So some of them I could see maybe a new twist because the military has changed. So I could see like a new version of MASH and everything. Maybe not set in Korea, you set it in Iraq, but you still have that kind of what do you call it? Medical folks that are doing like medical military kind of stuff. So like a remake of MASH in that sense. That's why I don't mind so much Equalizer, because instead of the original gentleman, and I forgot his name, that played the Equalizer, you got an African American woman. There's a whole narrative about the family dynamics that's going on in this new Equalizer. So there are some twists to this version that I actually enjoy. But some of these other remakes, I'm going like, I don't know if I need another version of Love Boat.
It's tough to call. It's tough to call because I do think like there is I think that there's value in the remake for sure, right? It's just like reintroducing younger generations to things that we used to love. I was hanging out with my goddaughter yesterday, and she was excited to show me these Pokemon cards, like it was something she discovered. And I said, my goddaughter is she's 7. I was like, you know about Pokemon? What, like, wow, this thing is stretching time. But it also it builds connections because oftentimes there are all of these gaps, these generational gaps. And I think quite often children feel unheard, right? And they sometimes can feel invisible. And it matches the older generation, a generation that's in matriarch. You can feel unheard, you can feel invisible. And so all these little things that can bridge the gap, my goddaughter enjoyed that I was able to like speak to her about Pokemon and understand what she was talking about with the powers, and then she loved Pikachu. I loved Pikachu, and I knew what Pikachu did. And so so that I didn't have to ask her all these questions, and she didn't have to feel, so it was a flow of conversation. And I think that remakes do this, and it brings you back to the original. So some young person or some kid get really excited about what they've just seen, and you can tell them, they did it before, you want to check it out, and they'll say, wow, yeah, sure. And they check it out and they enjoy it, and they look at you like you're cool.
Yeah, that's
Which
what
we
I
all
mean. Because I'm
feel
sure that there will be some people that will, because I'm not the first person that brought that up, because actually it was taught to me and everything. But I'm sure there's some people that will see Bass Reeves and then want to go back and watch the old Lone
Yeah.
Ranger to figure out what that parallel is and whether this could have been the case and everything. Because, like I said, when I heard that, and I heard that actually from some historians, that's actually who the character is based on and everything, then yeah, they might go back and watch that old 1950s or 1940s version of the Lone Ranger just to see what
Yep.
that dynamic is between the character of Lone Ranger and Tonto, and also the and how that parallels to Bass Reeves and his Indian counterpart, and how that could have been where the basis was. I think the only thing that Bass Reeves doesn't have is the mask and everything, but you can definitely see where the parallel
Absolutely.
could exist in everything. So, and it might push, like you said, people to watch the original version and all in
Yeah.
that kind of way. So,
And you also have to look at it this way too, Mark. It puts money back into their pockets as well, right? Because now you're talking about like something that's being watched again, and you get some sort of residuals from that. And so people who could have been forgotten and they're in a retirement, Hollywood retirement home or whatever, um, now they're getting a return on their investment because these remakes are getting people interested. It's like music. It's like, when hip hop was sampling, I mean, still sampling, but when hip hop like was in its golden age and people were complaining, it's sampling like da da da, it's not real music, it's da da da. Uh, but you hear those songs and it makes you think like, oh, well, who did the original? Let me go into the liner notes. Who did that? And you go back to the original song, and not only does that person have a new fan, quite possibly, but whatever's set up, whatever in their contract, streaming, whatever, little cent or something goes to that individual. And you think if Drake samples something, that cent becomes a good 100 grand in a year for that old artist,
right.
because that song is being played so many times.
Well, not only that, but coming back to the music element, I was even thinking about how a lot of people were criticizing Beyonce because Beyonce decided to release a country album, but they forget the fact that a lot of the instrumentation of country music came from the African continent. So the fact that Beyonce decided to do this music does not surprise me. I understand that she might be doing a cover because I saw it on a post from Dolly Parton of Jolene, which we know is a famous Dolly Parton cut and everything, but definitely even with what she has released so far and all in that space, that now it's going to get people to do research on the origin of the banjo, which is kind of what she is alluding to. And actually one of those, the lady that is playing the banjo, Rihanna Giddens, is actually from this area as well. So she was part of a group called the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and she's the one that is providing the banjo tunes on that Beyonce song and everything. But I was just wondering your
Absolutely.
thoughts around that. It will push people not just to learn about the artist, but also the history behind some of the things that are being talked about as well.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's like an open door, right? We all have our taste. So I believe in it. Now, am I a fan of it all? No, but I can't I can't be the one to pick and choose, right? Because I'm not God. So I can't affect someone else's taste. So I can't be mad and happy at the same time. So it's just like I see the value and the worth for it, and I just, some shows I rock with, some I don't. Now, going back to the Fast and the Furious, we now you're talking about like these people, yeah, it's more money. It's that at that point it's just a cash cow. It's just more money, more money, more money, right? Uh to a certain extent, you look at it, it's an ecosystem for the labor people, right? People who are working and are what they would call below the line. They know that every year they're going to get work with some Fast and the Furious, but then what is the sacrifice, or what is the cost of that? And the cost is the squeezing out of original ideas. And and that's the catch 22. That's the part that I get sad about, because it is extremely hard to get an original idea funded and supported by the individuals of the system that has the means. And so I wish that things were I wish that things were a bit fair, and that the ground was even for original ideas, just the same as it is for IP. I just
Yeah.
wish that grounding was a bit more level.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. I just wanted your take, and we've only got a few more minutes to go, probably about 10, 15. But
Mhm.
what was your take on the notion of the strike? Because I do know that some of the things that filmmakers were concerned about was the notion of AI and all along those lines, kind of like
Mhm.
taking people out of the picture. And that was part of the reason behind the strike. And I know there was a settlement recently, but I just wondering, as one that's in Chicago, and I know that there's an active film community in Chicago that y'all were following, just like we were in North Carolina, what was taking
Yeah.
place there in LA. But what was your take on how that strike was transpiring, whether as a writer or as a filmmaker? Because I want to say it was both the Screen Actors Guild as well as the writers that were involved in separate strikes. But I just wanted your take on AI and its role in filmmaking now.
Ooh, I'll be honest. I'm more of a traditionalist in the sense of the things that I connect with, that I consume. Like, I love, I enjoy smaller stories. I enjoy independent stories. Um, I enjoy the feel of European and Asian cinema just the same as I enjoy like the Hollywood machine. Um, and so for me, like, when I think about AI, some people get excited. I'm about community, so I love working with people, and the anxieties around it all is that people will get squeezed out. The writer will get squeezed out. The performer will get squeezed out. And in fact, the performer is more at risk because it's easier to replicate the individual. It's very difficult right now. It's very difficult for AI to replicate the process of creating original ideas in a narrative sense that makes sense for our understanding. Because the writing is quite scientific in how we understand it, and you go to a screenwriting course and you learn the science behind it, you learn why it works. So that is difficult to replicate on the AI end, but people are working on fixing that issue, and that for me, that doesn't feel great. But on the performer's end, there's a chance that they could be squeezed out if they accept uh if they accept the reproduction of their image, their likeness,
Okay.
their voice, right? It could easily be processed. And in fact, I've seen it. Now they have trailers out, full on AI trailers, where you're looking at people, and these aren't even real human beings. It's likenesses that have been mixed and matched, and out comes this complete AI thing. Um, and it's cool looking, but it is scary when you think about, like, people actually have to make an honest living. Um, you can AI is certainly, it has the ability to take certain roles below the line,
Yeah.
100%. You
No
know,
doubt about that. And speaking of that community level and everything, because as you said, I was
Mhm.
just thinking to myself, and all along those lines. One of the greatest community oriented activities that I've ever seen, and I've actually participated as a actor in a couple. I think it might have been two or three, and I definitely have been on a behind scenes kind of like helping friends of mine to get their productions off of the ground and
Yeah.
everything. So I've definitely had various roles within the films, and that to me is one of the most collaborative artistic efforts that exist in everything. Because, like I said, I am
Mhm.
oftentimes, whether I'm watching a TV show or a movie, I'm one of those people that will sit there and watch the credits, and they can watch the credits after your film. So I do know that there's a whole lot of people involved in a film, whether it is an experimental documentary or whether it's a Hollywood film. So I'm going like, how do you put together that team? Because that is oftentimes something that is quite fascinating to me. The ability to get together that team, because oftentimes you got to get everybody from the grips down to the catering crew to a number of other folks. So it is
Absolutely.
not a simple project. In my mind, it sometimes takes almost a um, the size of a small town to make a film and all along those lines. But I just wondering, how
Yeah.
did you get that together, and what is your thoughts around the team level needed to make a successful film?
Yeah, I think film is about it is about community. It's almost impossible to go forth and build a career without community, without people that are willing to help you, give you opportunities, come on, assist in however way fast that they can, support you financially. Like the going back real quickly to AI, like the I guess the intrinsic benefit is sort of democratizing the process of making a film, right? Is to be able to, with very little means, create big worlds, get these big ideas out of your head and to create a world, and not have to sell your left leg to do this. Um, it, but as for me, what I've seen with like cameras, right, um, as the history of our sort of segue into digital filmmaking is shown, we were having these conversations when the DVX came out, right? If I said the name of that camera correctly, but this camera that was supposed to take tape and make it look more like film, and then the cameras that were the first digital images, and you're no longer putting your movie on film or on tape. Um, that was supposed to democratize the practice, and to a certain extent, at a certain time, it did. It was the advent of web series, the mumblecore phase. But then the system was like, nah, no, 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 no. We got to get paid. And so you get streamers who say, these, if you didn't make your movie with this camera, we can't show your movie.
Mhm.
Um, that's an actual thing that a couple of streamers do. Um, the process of like editing, color correction, things just got the codes that were built into making all of these run got so advanced that all of these systems just started costing more money. And you might as well just shoot film at that rate. So yeah, community, it's extremely invaluable. I got my team, like I said, I shot a bit of my film during the pandemic, and so I had to bring together people I trusted. It started with my producer Tiffany Jackman, who I had known since I was 18. We went to college together at NYU. I needed a DP who was in the area and who was talented. I was living in New York at the time, so I didn't know too many people. So I'm just kind of on looking at on Google or looking at other people's films, like who's in the Chicago area. I found my DP, Amani Dennison, who lived in Brooklyn but was from Kentucky and was at Louisville at the time during the pandemic. She had a home in Louisville. I was like, oh my God. I hit Imani up. I was like, would you be down for driving from Louisville to Chicago for me? Because I can't put you on a plane. We're dealing with my grandmothers. And Imani was so generous. She said, yeah, I'm definitely down for it. I want to do this project. Let's figure it out. So Imani drove by herself. Um, so that's like, it's just the nature of community. You need people who want to help you out, and see the value in you.
Yeah, speaking of helping you out and everything, one of the things that always shocks people, and you kind of mentioned it earlier and everything, but um, how important is it to have those alternative incomes and everything? Because I know a lot of times people will be like, I want to do a film, I want to do something creative. I've actually got a dear friend of mine that is a funk musician, has been in that space for a few years, and he's a few years older than me, so he might be in his mid 60s, but he's been doing it ever since he was probably in his 20s or 30s, and lived in New York at the time. But I know that on one of his side hustles, he drives for Uber. I've got some other creative friends that drive for Grubhub and a number of other things. So I was just wondering, how much are you able to dedicate your life and your situation in general to doing just
Mm.
films, or do you have to have that alternative income in order to supplement what you are doing as what I consider a career? Because to me, there's a difference between a career and a job. A job is something that sometimes you do just to pay the bills, and I've actually got a few of those. And then there's our careers, those things that you love to do, and as that old adage goes, you if you love what you do, then the money will flow. So that's kind of more of the
Yeah.
career kind of attitude. That's something that you love to do, and you would do it even if there wasn't as much money involved because you have a passion for it. And that's what I'm getting from you about filmmaking. But I'm also
Oh,
wondering about that day-to-day survival, something, and maybe you do some teaching on the side. Maybe you do, like I said, my friends do, Grub Up and DoorDash and things along those lines. So how much are you able to do and devote just enough to just filmmaking alone?
Mm. I'm blessed right now in the sense that I just do the filmmaking right now. That pays my bills, and it's a privileged situation. But also, like, I don't have any property in New York or LA, so I'm certainly not at that level. And I'm looking at, and that's a level I would love to be at. I'd love to say, like, I bought a home in the city that I'm working in. I can do that in Chicago, but the industry isn't necessarily fully here. You know, the industry is in three places really: LA, New York, and Atlanta, to a certain extent. Um, yeah, I can buy a home in Atlanta, but I can't buy a home in LA. I can't buy a house in New York eh, at all. So now, if you know, now you start thinking about that, like, this is what I want for my life. I want a $2 million property. So if I can't do that with just filmmaking, I might have to supplement. Like, I might have to do teaching, or but I would advise anyone who's just starting their film career or coming out of college, you're studying film in college. I wish someone told me when I was in college to just get a full-time job and do your films on the weekend. Start there. I thought when I came out, I thought, like, man, I got to get in this industry. You know, however I can, I got to get in the industry right now. And I was doing, I don't even know how I survived, Mark. PAN, odd ins and outs. I don't even remember it all. Um, but I do wish that I had just sat down, got a full-time job, and had no shame about it. I'm surviving. And whenever I can save up some money, maybe I make one film a year. And that's all you need. All you really need is one film a year. That's called consistency.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
definitely consistent. How
yeah.
important do you think it is to, because you just mentioned it, and I do know that there are filmmakers throughout the country, and we even had some that have been global in the past at the Hayti Festival. And I know that one of the organizers this year was from the Bahamas, so we definitely had some international flair as well this year because they actually had the Junkanoo group that was out of the Bahamas and everything that was there on the closing ceremony and everything. But how important do you think it is to live in one of those major cities, or can you be a successful filmmaker and to live in, say, a North Carolina or a Virginia or a Chicago or even a Detroit or Houston? Or do you feel that you have to be in one of those primary areas that you just mentioned, New York, LA, and Atlanta, in order to be the bigger success, or can you be a big success in some of those other places as well?
I know. I think success is relative. I think that's where you start. For me, I think you, as a human being, start by defining what success means for you,
Yeah.
um, and you go from there. Like, it's all, they're all different levels. If you wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, um, and specifically, like, you decide specifically what type of documentary filmmaker you want to be, um, then that dictates where you want to be. But let's say you want to be a television director, and that's your bread and butter consistently. You want to work like a 9 to 5 television director. You want 1 month vacation every year, and the other times you're hopefully working. Uh, Theoretically, let's say you direct 3 episodes of television. That means you're either on set for 1 week to 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, depending on the length of the show. Everything else around that is development prepping for it, editing it, and that gets you a year. Now you're talking, okay, I need to be in the three. I need to be in LA. I need to be in New York. I need to be Atlanta because I'm talking about doing this thing like a 9 to 5, raising a family, buying property. I have to be in a city where the television is coming like that, and you're meeting people, and that's the thing. Like you also, it's a lifestyle thing, right?
Mhm.
It's not just the work. Where are you meeting people? Where are you actually pumping into your community? It's not just all take. The people in LA, New York, Atlanta, that it's a lot of work, but also it's also gardening community and
Mhm.
pumping into community in a sense, is being there for somebody that's having a hard time. Issa Rae, being there for Issa Rae, she's having a hard time, and you see her and and you see her at a coffee shop and you say, man, you're looking a little down, Issa, I don't want nothing from you, just you don't have to tell me nothing personal, but you're looking a little down. I want you to know I'm a fan. I love you, sister. You're beautiful, sister. Da da da. These things, that's like giving to your community, doing community service, stuff like that. You're in the community at that rate. Um, you want to be an independent filmmaker, and you're not interested in Marvel. You're
Mhm.
interested in small community stories. Sometimes you work with non-actors. Now you can live anywhere, and chances are you'll be able to buy a house because you're not.
But that makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense. You know, you may buy a house depending on where you are, everything. By the way, there is a major documentary film festival. Some people compare it to Sundance that had been on hold, but now it's back full force and everything. But that had also takes place in Durham, and that'll be next month. So we do have the Full Frame Film Festival. It used to be Double Take, but that is
oh
a
yeah.
major festival that involves the documentary world. And definitely, like I said, some people consider that the Sundance of documentary filmmaking, because definitely there have been a number of great people that have come through here, and they're expecting more great ones when it comes through next month. So definitely there is a active documentary film community here as well and everything. So I was just
It really
wondering
is.
how, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was piggybacking off of you. If anyone watching, like it is in full frame. You're absolutely correct. It's huge, and I'm happy that it's back. I know it had a run into a rough patch with the pandemic, and I'm so happy that it's back.
No, it's definitely back and looking forward to being at some of those films next month and everything along those
Mhm.
lines. So it's definitely good that it is back in force and everything. How do you manage that work-life balance? That's one of the things I was getting ready to get to and everything. So how do you
Mm.
manage that work-life balance? Because that's something that we talk about on a number of guests here on the radio show with Mark Lee, and it's not just filmmakers, but it's creatives and even some educators and other types as well. But how do you manage that work-life balance? It sounds like you are still in that non-parent space that we were talking about earlier, and I know that I'm in
Right.
that space
Right.
as well. But still, you got to deal with that, paying the bills and dealing with everything else. So, how do you manage that work-life balance?
I'm not the best at it. I I certainly am not the best at it. I think I think when you accept people into your life, I think that kind of gets you in shape. That kind of gets you right. You know, for me, I don't have a family. I'm not in a romantic partnership, and so when I look at my life, and sometimes I get a bit sad about this, it does feel like uh, all work, if not just it's certainly most work. It's certainly most work, um, and then the other percentage is family because I'm in Chicago, so I'm close to family, and that helps me with the balance. But if I weren't in Chicago, when I was living in New York, it felt like all work. I would hang out with my friends, of course, but also my friends are filmmakers for the most part, or artists, if they aren't filmmakers. And so we're in the process of like discussing creations, and we're talking about life as well. But we're all creative minded, and we all tend to go back to talking about and being about the things that we love. Um, So it's tough. It's tough for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah, I need to find a hobby. Then I need to
Yeah,
find.
yeah, hobbies are good. I've been actually doing word games and some of those things because I've downloaded a few from the phone and some of those logic puzzles. So I was actually telling some folks earlier that it's kind of like those, you see the pictures and you got to find out the differences and all along those lines. So I think I've downloaded a few of those just to break the monotony. So that's been my
Yeah.
hobby and everything. So I definitely can relate, even though I've got to do with some better hobbies than that. Maybe get back out into the volleyball court or back into the walking and some other things. But yeah, I do have some side hobbies and everything. Just really quickly, like I said, only about 5 minutes ago, but what
Uh,
your thoughts around, because you kind of alluded to it earlier, gatekeepers and all in that space. And then I'm going to play
mm,
that one clip that I said I was going to play as well. But what is your thoughts around gatekeepers? Because that's been a conversation, no matter which creative field you're in, is this notion of how to get around the gatekeepers, because sometimes the gatekeepers will keep the doors closed, particularly if you've got big project. And it sounds like, even though this was a documentary, an experimental documentary, that you have some aspirations. As I'm hearing your conversation of making it into the bigger Hollywood market, whether it's with your own stories or working on other people's stories
mm,
as well. But how do you deal with the gatekeepers, and how is your method going to be to handle those gatekeepers? Because there are not that many of us, even though there are the uh, rhymes and a few others that are gatekeepers in our community, but there's not as
sure.
many compared to other communities as well.
Sure. You know, I think they exist on a certain level, but then also like they don't exist. If it's almost like it's almost like giving power to
Mhm.
something that doesn't deserve the power. Um, a gatekeeper can't stop you from going out and doing your own work. And like I'll go back to my comment when I said all it takes is one film a year. I'm not talking about making some big film, making a feature film. You know, you can, if it's a 1 minute thing and you submit that to festivals. A lot of festivals are programming 1 minute shorts. Uh, Hayti has shorts around features, and so
Yes.
they don't need 20-minute, 30-minute projects all the time. It doesn't really work out that way. So there are opportunities to just keep doing work, keep being present, and also it, like I said earlier, it's an ecosystem, so it's not all take. You want to give, you want to be about community service. You want to be about exchanging talents, what it's called a talent exchange. You help me out on something, I help you out on something, and that just keeps you active. And the more that people see you being active, they start to engage. It's like you said it earlier. You do the work, and then the money comes.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah,
You, you,
that's how it is.
yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned the ecosystem, and I have definitely curated the festival in the past. Like I said, I think Tyra has done an amazing job this year and everything. And there have been others like Lana that have done great jobs in the past as well and everything. But I do know that there are certain platforms, because I'm actually been um, part of film festival selection committees, not just for
Hmm.
Hayti,
Hmm.
but also for things like Nevermore, which is a horror and fantasy type of film festival that is also held in Durham at the Carolina Theater. And even though
Hmm.
it's not necessarily my lifestyle, they like to have people that are of various lifestyles and everything. So I've actually judged, I think for the last 3 years, Out South, which used to be called the LGBT Festival or something like that, but now it's called Out South. And I'm actually in the process of judging some of those films now and everything in that way. So how important is it to have those kind of film repositories, for lack of a better term, because I know Film Freeway is used by quite a few, and there are others as well. But I just wanted your take on these film depositories in order to get your films to the film festivals.
Oh, you mean like a film freeway, like a I think that they've proven to be helpful. I mean, obviously that there's a fee
Right.
involved in it all, but uh when I first started making films, I mean, it kind of was a little bit of the Wild West. You
Mhm.
had every festival had its own site
Right.
or payment method, whether you have to send a check or what have you. and they all asked for different things, and so you had to make sure that you had just everything, and and you give whatever the festival wanted. And it was a lot more work versus like the Film Freeway. It's a platform. Most of the festivals are signed on. You could do your watch list, everything like that. Get all of these notifications. You can spend a whole day on Film Freeway and just go down a rabbit hole. You can search black, and you get all the black film festivals. And you just be going and da da da, or whatever word. You could just search a word, and it'll give you every film festival where the word is in the title, and you just go from there.
It's not
So
just Film Freeway, Donald. It's not just Film Freeway. You can go down a rabbit hole because I know I've been down and you
yeah,
saw that I had the permission to get it from Tyra and everything. And I'm going to play that clip, but you can also go down a serious rabbit hole on Vimeo as well. And I know that my TV
Vimeo,
uses
yeah,
Vimeo as a platform as well. So yeah, you can go down a whole rabbit hole down Vimeo as well. You might
Film
never come
Hub.
out. It might last for about a day or two just watching the films that you find on Vimeo, particularly if you've got a subject matter that interests you. Because I know I've typed in
Yeah,
things like blues, or I've typed in, and I mentioned earlier, basketball, or I've typed in other
yeah,
things that I'm interested in, and even Native American, African American, and yeah, you'll find the entire categories. And if you go down that rabbit hole, you might find yourself, if you start at say 4 in this afternoon, since we're about 4 now, at least here in Durham, North Carolina, you might still be at 4 a.m. still going down that rabbit hole. So that rabbit hole
right,
can last
right,
all day, depending on how active you want to go down that rabbit hole and everything in
yeah.
that
I,
space.
let me make this quick point before you play the clip, because I know you got to wrap up soon.
Yeah.
Just going, and I'm happy you mentioned basketball, but just going back to the gatekeeper thing, because I don't want anyone watching this and thinking, oh, I'm naive because I didn't mention the top of the game, right? Like obviously there are your Disneys, there are your Amazons, your Paramounts, things like that, and there is the idea that people are having a hard time going to these companies with their original ideas because they have the money. So yeah, at a certain level, um, there are it is very difficult to get projects funded, and especially at a certain level. So to your point about gatekeepers, you can find blocks in the industry, but it's like you said with basketball, you just got to pivot. You just
Mhm.
have to pivot. You have to be working on multiple things at the same time. So maybe this doesn't go, but you can start to focus on that thing, and it's just pivoting, really.
And speaking of sports and the early thing before I play the clip, yeah, they've been pivoting big time because I know that Marquette, my school, as well as I think that school that you were talking about, the University of Illinois, and even UNC and a number of other ones, they've been pivoting into the entertainment industry because quite a few of them have great NIL deals. Because I've seen that they got their whole NIL deals, which is a form of pivoting in the entertainment space with that whole name, image, and likeness thing. So they're definitely
Yep.
making some pretty decent money. I wish I had been able to make that kind of money just as a college student because I did not play athletics and everything, but I wish they had those NIL deals when I was in school. Because when I was there, I'm sure Doc Rivers, even though he's doing quite well he's doing all right as the Milwaukee Bucks coach and all in that space, but I'm sure he wished he had NIL deals when he was playing in the 80s because I was in school at the
Right.
time that he was playing. And I'm sure sometimes Doc's probably going like, why did I have an NIL deal when he's seeing what Oso and Tyler and a number of the other players are getting, including David Joplin, who is from Milwaukee. So I'm sure he's going like, I needed one of those deals back when I was playing. I'm sure that Hubert Davis is even thinking that, the coach of UNC, when he's looking at some of the ones that Armand and others are getting as well. I mentioned earlier, and this is a clip I was going to play about this music narrative. And like I said, I am a music fan, so I was going to play this one. This
Mhm.
toward the end, and it does have one of those pictures that you were talking about and everything, but it also has this notion of the one of the main characters singing one of those old time gospels. So that's the part I wanted to get to, but let's get to this part as well.
Yep.
like I said, we give you both the beginning and the end, but that scene I just loved as a way to end it and everything. I definitely want people to watch it and get more of that. But whenever I think of the nature of our community and everything, that doesn't matter whether you're religious or not, that whole church music narrative is so much a part of our life. Because I don't consider myself overly religious, consider myself probably more spiritual than religious, but I do know that that narrative is part of our storyline, for lack of a better term, and everything. So that's when I saw that as the ending. I was going like, "Oh yeah, this just fits so perfectly," and everything. That, I think of our narrative. That's so much a part of our narrative, particularly like you said earlier, is those that grew up with any sort of southern roots, whether it was Mississippi, whether it was North Carolina, whether it was Georgia, and everything. So you couldn't hardly go into a house without hearing some old time gospel playing in the background, particularly of a certain generation of grandparents. And since you mentioned that some of these grandparents were in their hundreds, and I'm going like, oh yeah, I definitely know that they probably were active in their church. I can even see them being like my grandparents and being in the deacon board and doing a part of the other church family and everything. So I just wondering how much of that musical overtone was important for you to have as a Chicago native, and particularly that gospel overtone.
Oh, very, very important because it's them. It's the music of my grandmother's, the music of my mother, and so I knew. I mean, when that moment happened, that moment, I would say not fully planned, but I knew that that's something that happens every night at that time when my mother would go over. That my church had the prayer line because of the pandemic, um, or it's my family's church, but it's the church I grew up in. So they started this prayer line, and so I knew that they do that at that particular time. And my mom would be over to call in and have my grandmother experience the prayer line. I did not know that they were going to sing that song and she was going to get into it. And so it was just a beautiful moment of me being in a perfect place with my camera and that all happening. And when it was happening, I knew that it was going to be the last thing that we saw in the film. Um, the timing was right, just the length of how it all played out. Everybody saying goodbye, the way my grandmother says goodbye. Um, so it was really just finding our way there. And me and my editor, John, we just found it in that stairwell and bringing up that photo to just sort of represent that ascension and transition to the next lifetime.
Yeah,
Um,
speaking
mhm.
and speaking of that, just really quick and everything, because as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself that when my uh, grandfather passed away. There should have been, I earlier mentioned my grandmother in that Jesus picture, but when my grandfather passed away, which would have been, I want to say in either, yeah, let's see, that would have been the late 70s and everything. It was
Mm.
almost as if he had to wait for certain family members to get there. I think he had to wait for his aunt, I mean, his daughter, my aunt at that time to get there. And I want to say she was coming
Oh,
from New Jersey and everything. So it's just like he was not going to leave until all the family members that he wanted to say goodbye to had gotten there and everything, because I was actually at a journalism camp. So that's why I know now that I think about it, that it was 79 and all that space. So I was at a journalism camp, ironically, at the UNC. And I remember that I had gone there and it was like they were waiting for her to get there because the rest of most of the my mother and her other two sisters, because actually lived in this area or in the North Carolina area. But that aunt has always been one to be a traveler. And I want to say at that time I don't think they were in Richmond. I think they were up in New Jersey. So it was like he wanted to
mhm.
wait for her to get there before he was going to make that transition, as you were just talking about, into the
Oh yeah.
ancestral ground. So it seems to me that that's very much a part of a lot of family narratives, because it's not just that story that I've heard, but I've heard other families that they know they can tell that the person is waiting to get that last person, whether it's a kid, because I know the film deals with that loss of your children and everything, or some other important family member until they make that transition. So just wondering your
Mm.
thoughts on that, because when I saw that scene, I'm going like, yeah, that's something that I could relate to, because I've seen it even with some of my aunts and great aunts as well, where it seemed like they were waiting for a certain person to get there before they would go ahead and make that transition.
Yeah, no, it's a very spiritual thing. I mean, that happened with my grandmother. It wasn't her ask. It was she was. She passed in 2021, literally January 1st, 2021. I was home from New York, because I came home for Christmas, but my grandmother had cancer. So we all knew that this was going to be the last rodeo. So I didn't have a ticket out of Chicago. Um, and my mother, because 2020 was such a traumatic year, and it was pandemic, everything like that, my mother was praying that she didn't want her mom to pass in 2020. She is just asking the Lord, like, oh, please, this not 2020, not 2020. And December 31st, man, it was looking like it. It was looking like it. Um, Approaching the new year was when things really started to calm in her body. We were giving her the I think it was morphine. If it's not morphine, it's the other thing that sort of like eases pain, whatever. Um, we did the countdown. It was such a beautiful thing of my mom, me, my sister, my brother-in-law, my father. We were all around her. We did the countdown. She's in bed and she passed. It probably was like it might have been around like 2 in the morning or something like that.
Okay.
That was when she passed, like 2 or 3 in the morning.
So two or
And
three the following year. So she made it to 2021,
we
literally.
made it to 2021. Yep. Died about 2 hours after the countdown. And
Wow.
I just, and my mom was she was overjoyed with about that. And so I think it's like you ask the universe for what you want, you're going to get a response. And it might not be exactly what you want, but it's the right thing for you. Whatever the universe is giving you, if you're asking for it and you're doing the work, um, the universe is going to give you the right response. My mom, in that respect, was doing the work, making sure she was comfortable. Um, we had her, everything was just so spiritual. The the hospital that was sending the nurse, the home nurse home, like the hospice nurse, my cousin worked there, and we
Oh,
had no idea. We had no idea. It's a cousin that's around my age. We had no idea. And my cousin was like, I'll be the hospice nurse. I'll take myself off the detail and I'm gonna take care of grandma. And so we had family taking care of her in her last days.
right.
And so it was just such a, yeah, so like you say, some of these things are just so spiritual in that
Oh no,
regard.
it's definitely spiritual. As you were saying, I was thinking how spiritual it is. Just really quickly, and then I got one final question. What is it
Mhm.
like having that contrast? Because you heard me mention my grandparents on my mother's side, my grandmother on my dad's side, and like I said earlier, I did not really know my granddad, even though the biology building at Central is named after him. But I want to say he passed um, shortly after I was born. Because I want to say I don't think I had gone to Turkey yet, because I went to Turkey while Dad was stationed in the Air Force from like about maybe 4 or 5 months till like 3 or 4 years old and everything along those lines, because Dad was stationed over there. So of course Mom went with him when they were together at the time. So we spent, I want to say, 2.5, 3 years there. I got to double check on the numbers and everything. But grandmother is on Dad's side was definitely more of a socialite. She was part of the whole nature of the African American Black Renaissance and the Harlem Renaissance and everything. So actually, if you
Cool.
read the letters to Arnold Bontemps to Langston Hughes, you'll hear them mentioning going to visit Molly. And at the time, it was visiting Molly and James Lee. But part of the reason going to Lee's house was because they knew they would get a certain drink. I think it was schnapps that they were going to be getting while they were visiting her. And all along those lines, because she was definitely known for being part of that. And I think she was friends, or at least knew Zora Neale Hurston. So she was part of that as a librarian, because she created the first African American library in Raleigh, the library that still exists to this day, and everything
Wow.
is actually now has a collection named after her, even though the library still has the Richard B. Harrison name, but their Molly Houston Lee collection is there. And I want to say that this was one of those things where she was being unorthodox, because she went in the 40s, I want to say it was, to Columbia University, and that was unheard of for an African American woman to be going to that kind of school and everything. But then she
Sure.
also was literally knocking on doors to collect the money to build that library that exists today. But definitely, she was more of that socialite community. Not saying that she wasn't religious. Even though I don't remember her being overly religious the way I do my mother's parents and everything. But I do know that she got buried at a Episcopalian church, so she might have had some religious ties, but I never saw her as being overtly religious the way I saw my grandmother on my parents' side, and definitely she was a socialite. There's no doubt about that. Because, like I said, she was friends with Zora Neale Hurston. It sounds like that's kind of a similar contrast that you had. That one grandparent might have been more of a socialite than the other one was. So I was just wondering, what was it like having that kind of contrasting grandparent styles?
You know, well, let me so like I wouldn't necessarily call my granny a social light. Um, she just loves conversation. She loves conversation.
Right.
My grandmother actually, I would probably say that she was more outgoing than my granny in terms of being the life of the party, hanging out. Things like that. And she, you know, she lived in two different places. She lived a long time in Mississippi and then came to Chicago, and she's going out with her daughters and hanging out and going to the mall, things like that. And when she moved to Chicago, so they were both like really upbeat, and there was a lot of life. And but I mean, it was really fascinating sort of seeing the distinctions in their personalities, because you know, I did like my granny is, you know, it's just like the sort of this mushy ball of how would you call it? Both of them are very loving, but my granny is mushier. You know,
Yeah.
you know, she like the one like, oh, make sure you're being a good boy. Make sure, you know, like come, everybody sit on my lap. Like she would have me and my sister on both the laps, read into it. Like, let's read, let's do the, you know, like, my grandmother, um she was a bit sterner. I'd say like she was a disciplinarian, you
Right.
know. But she was funny. She was funny, man. And this she had this laugh that you could hear a mile away.
Which one had you
And she,
doing the chores? Because I know that my grandmother that was on mom's side, we would definitely get out there, and while we might play in the yard and everything, she was not going to have you play cards. Grandma Molly might have allowed you to play cards, but Grandma Mary was not going to have you doing that, because that was kind of against the religious morals in terms of what their beliefs were and all along those lines.
uh-huh.
But definitely they would have you doing like the whole like splitting the peas and doing other things that could be very time consuming. At least Grandma Mary did, and everything in that nature. And even speaking of food, it was interesting because Grandma Mary was more of a um, traditional kind of Southern cooker and all along those lines. So you talk about the bacon and all along those lines. I could see Grandma Mary doing that. Whereas, and I just recently learned this, Grandma Molly was more of a gourmet cooker, because I knew I got some interesting food from her, but I didn't really give it as being gourmet cooking until I was talking to my mom and my aunt recently. They were like, yeah, she was a real good gourmet cooker. And like I said, it's one of my faults. I'm not a good cooker. That's probably why I eat out way too much and everything. Now, my brother, on the other hand, has inherited from my dad, and he is definitely a good chef and a good person in terms of creating recipes and everything. That's something I've got to definitely work on, because I'm too quick to go out and probably doing it later on today. Going across the street, even to one of those restaurants that you were alluding to earlier, or going to something as simple as KFC, which is also across the street from Haytime as well, or a DoorDash order. So I'll probably be spending way too much money that I don't need to be spending on that later today, when I probably need to just go get some food and create it in my own apartment. But maybe you're better at that, and maybe you're not as one of those people that goes out and rushes into the DoorDash or the fast food. But I know I'm notorious for doing that, and I know sometimes I can be notorious for doing that.
uh, you, um, my mom's mom, my grandmother, she actually lived with us for a little bit of time. So
Mm.
so it would make sense that she was more like my memories of discipline and my memories of structure or doing chores are more connected to her because she lived with us in the house. So it was more present. With my granny, I mean there was still chores, but not so much, I think, because it would be all about a visit, going over, and she's so happy to have the visit that it's more or less things to do. It's all activities like she take us to the library, or she used to get her hair done somewhere in Chicago. An older woman would do her hair. She would take us there. She wanted us to speak to every single person. She wanted us to go over to her neighbor's house and spend time there and visit her neighbor. So her neighbor was a older woman by the name of Mrs. Williams, and we go there, and Mrs. Williams suffered dementia a little bit. And so like the conversations would be in loop, and my granny would tell us, "Oh, go over, spend some time with Miss Williams, make sure she's doing all right." So me and my sister, we'd be there about an hour and it's running the conversation on loop, and then find our way back. So it's because it was with my granny, it's the visit.
Mhm.
That's more connected to like, oh, let's do all of these activities because you guys are visiting. So my grandmother was more day to day, and that becomes,
Mhm.
you got to get the structure when it's day to day.
No, you definitely got to get the structure day to day. As you were thinking about dementia, I was actually thinking about my great aunt, because she also had, it was either Alzheimer's or dementia. I think it was dementia, but definitely there was a point of time before she passed away that I do remember her getting confused as to who people were and getting people mixed up.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that you dealt with that even in dementia, because he would be talking about talking to people that had passed on as if they were still in the room and everything along those lines. So I do know that
Oh
part of
wow.
dementia is some of that confusion going on, where they're having conversations with people that have passed and also confusing people as well. I know
Oh
Mom and I
wow.
had a couple of
Yeah.
times where there was some confusion there in that space. So definitely that is something that is part of that dementia conversation that goes on as well.
No, I didn't. It wasn't. I didn't have that experience. I think Miss Williams would just kind of forget things, points, stories that she touched on, or it was
Gotcha.
like that sort of thing. But I mean, I'll tell you, I really was blessed with my grandfather on my mom's side. My mom's father, he was the only one of my grandparents who actually was undergoing dementia, and he didn't get to fully experience it. He passed of cancer when he was 76. I was in fourth grade. So I have vivid memories of him because he lived with us as well. That was my mom went and moved him in. She got him from Mississippi because he was being taken advantage of by, and I believe it might have been a deacon at his church who was taking
Mhm.
advantage of him, um, kind of taking him to go and cash his check. That thing that, and so a good neighbor. No, it was someone from the bank, or it was someone who was involved in services that realized, they saw that my grandfather was doing something too often, and they called my mom to come and down and check on him, and we had to move him up to the house. So I had vivid memories of my grandfather being around, and just the kindest man, funny man. Um,
Wow.
that was why my grandmother moved in to also take care of him. So it's all of these women who were in service, to their family members. Um,
Yeah, it
and
sounds like a lot of service going on and everything. What
oh, it
advice
was
do
a lot
you
of
think?
service.
Yeah, a lot of service. Just like I said, what advice do you think? Because I've had friends that have dealt with this before. You mentioned that one of your grannies was a single mother and had a multitude of kids. And like I said, I've got friends of mine
Mhm.
that are single mothers now, and some of them have a multitude of kids, and even in some cases, grandkids. And I know that happened with one of my cousins. He actually married a young lady that had kids, and I want to say grandkids at the time that they got married. So, what advice do you think that your granny would give to folks that are in that situation, whether they are still trying to pursue their social life or whether they're trying to survive in general. So, what advice do you think that you would give to folks that were in that similar kind of environment in the year 2024?
I mean, if I were to be completely honest, they'd probably say, pray on it. Put your
Right.
problems in the hands of the Lord. That's pretty much the advice that they would give. But I think the practical advice that they might also give, and I know the actual practice of their lives was just leaning on community, being being willing to accept help when the help is offered. Because that's how, like, my grandmother she was widowed, so she's a single mother out of circumstance, and it was really leaning on that community. She had the help of her mother-in-law, who she had a good relationship with, um, and everybody just lived around each other. So it was difficult, but it was also a village.
Yeah.
At least that's what it seemed. That it was a village.
Yeah.
Um,
Just, yeah. Man,
she
that
wasn't
village
single
is
for long.
very.
Hey, Mark, she wasn't single for long now.
I know that's right. She got a new relationship quickly. I understand that's right. But speaking of that, and one of the things that I get every guest to do, and it definitely has been a fascinating conversation. I knew it would be when I met you at the Hayti Heritage Center, and all along those lines, and hoping to get some other filmmakers from that festival coming on this show, as well as the online dinner party, and hopefully we can get you to come back. And I can tell you, and I know that some of your people are watching, that the Pod TV network is always looking for providing avenues for people to show their films and everything. So if you want this particular film to be shown on the network, they pretty much give me carte blanche as any other projects you've got as well, whether they are on the festival circuit. I know when they're on the festival circuit, you oftentimes don't like them to be shown publicly and everything, but whenever they are available, they've pretty much given me carte blanche. So whether it's this one or an older one, I can pretty much say that I can show it because they've pretty much given me that kind of carte blanche and all along those lines. So you might want to pass that on to your folks and just give me an answer, not necessarily now. I wouldn't put you in that kind of predicament and everything, but whenever you are wanting it to be done, it can be done here on Pod TV and all along those lines. And what I get all my guests to do, and I'll actually get off camera as you answer, is if throughout the network, one of the things that we like to talk about is a sense of positivity. It's part of my own DNA and my own nature. So I'd love to have our global audience hear a message of positivity from you, and any words of inspiration that you want to give in that sense and everything. And then if you want to tell folks how they can reach you and how they can get in touch with you on social media. I know that you're on Instagram, because that's actually how we've been communicating back and forth, and that you're on some of the other platforms as well. So if you want to tell a word of positivity and a message of inspiration within that positivity, and how you can be contacted. And then after that, I'll probably torture you like I've tortured some of the other members by putting on this Can Do Spice commercial, which is a friend of mine that has a natural spice that was actually born out of her love for her dad. So she actually
Oh, wow.
references, while the film is about her mother, she actually references her love for her dad and why she came up with Can Do Spices and why that has that name, because it is actually a ode to her dad and her dad's love of spices.
Yeah, yeah. The positivity, and I'd say if everyone if everyone could think of themselves and realize and accept the truth that you are a miracle. That's what I like to live by. I'm a miracle. You're a miracle. The fact that we're here, breathing in this time and space, a lot of things had to go right. So this every breath that you take, you're showing the universe's work. You're showing God's work that that miracles still exist. And so in that respect, whatever you want, it can happen. All you got to do is keep going. Um, and you'll find your purpose, and it's not about forcing purpose. It's just um deciding what you want and just going for it, and the purpose materializes out of that. That's really that's what I have. That's what I have, man. You're a miracle. Keep doing it, and keep requesting it. Um, Finding me, I'm on the best way is Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Meekly, Meekley, Meekly. And I can be emailed as well, films with an S, FILMS, films at donaldconley.com.
So I definitely greatly appreciate that. And like I said, hopefully this won't torture you too much, but this is Kendu Spices as she talks about her love of her dad and the reason that she did that. And then we'll get out of here probably with that same logo that brought us in here and everything. But like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you'll make a return trip in the not too distant future. But definitely we covered a lot about filmmaking and about life and about the matriarchs as well. So definitely thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully we can have a return trip in the near future.
The pleasure was mine, Mark. I appreciate you inviting me on the show.
No problem.
You know how people love to enjoy food and don't understand how to flavor their food or how to replicate a meal? They're interested in supplements but don't know where to begin? Well, what I do is I take the guesswork out of enjoying flavor and wellness with my flavorful spice blends, so that they can create delicious meals with healing benefits. Can Do Spice was created to help cooks at any level enjoy healing through food. Every spice blend was designed to give added health benefits of natural herbs. Every blend is complete. There's no need to add any additional spice for a delicious meal. Saving you time and money while adding supplements to your meals can be both tasty and fun. My earliest memories in the kitchen began with my father, Kenny Can Do Bond, so it was fitting that I would name this line after him. I have always looked to natural remedies to supplement the body, and I found myself hiding herbs and minerals in foods for my family. That's when it hit me. Everyone needs Can Do Spice. Everyone should be having this. It's an exclusive brand for cooks at any level who want to create flavorful dishes with healing benefits that can satisfy the body and soul. Add a little spice to your life. Give Can Do Spice a try.